money. I mean, money's about the most important thing in this society. Why don't they teach us anything about it? They can't. It's a confidence trick. Yeah, you know, and it's 180 degrees from the way we think of it. You know, we think that money comes from somebody else, but it actually comes from us. You know, when you get a loan, they present you with a loan agreement. Yeah, what do you think that loan agreement is? It's a promissory note. I promise to pay back 3 times the amount if it's a mortgage. You know, so. But what they do with that promissory note, they monetize it. They put it into an account and cash it. And now they give you that money and say, now you have to pay it back to us. But you created that money. You know, it's your promissory note. You created that money. So transaction's over with. You don't have to pay them back because they didn't do anything. They just went, thank you very much, and here you go.
Fundamentally, a promissory note is a promise to pay. Now, if I was going to give you a promissory note for 2 dozen eggs, that means here's an IOU that I owe you, 2 dozen eggs. Now, it could be on demand, or it could be at a set time in the future. If it was on demand, you would be within your right to say, John, look, here's a promissory note. It says on demand, I want 2 dozen eggs. So I said, all right, look, I haven't got on me. I'll pop over the shop and get you your eggs. Here we go. There we go. And this is what we did originally when promissory notes started out, was that we used them to make a promise that, because, I've got like all these pounds of gold, right, and I want them stored safely. And I want to be able to trade that gold, but without the hassle of carrying it around. So what I do, I go to the bank and they give us a promissory note. So I've got this promise to pay. So I can then take it somewhere else and say, look, I've got £2 of, 2 pounds of gold here, or silver, whatever it is. This is how it started out. Now, at no time have promissory notes been, outlawed or taken away, and this is how big corporations actually trade with each other, with promissory notes. And in their memorandum, articles of association, when they set up their businesses, a lot of them will state within their documents that they will take promissory notes. Now, the problem is, of course, that the actual Bank of England and our government, working with the banks, have taken away all the value to the promissory notes which are used as our currency. So now the promise to pay £1, well, £1 of what? It's not £1 of anything. It's just, it's now become like monopoly money. This is back to the analogy with monopoly. It's not worth anything. So basically it's just a piece of paper. So what we do, we can actually say, well, here's a promissory note for £1,000. I want to swap it for your promissory note, or put it into my bank account and credit my bank account with £1,000. Now, we spoke to a bank manager, and we said to the bank manager, could you tell me what would happen if I came to your branch with a promissory note for £1,000? Would you have to accept it? And his words were, yes, of course I would. It's law. So you're going to accept a promissory note? No, I'm not going to accept it, but by law, I have to. So this is a bank manager that knew the law. He also knew the difference between a bill of exchange and a promissory note as well. So he was well up on his law. So, and remember, these are statutes, but because these are companies, they have to apply by their statutes, you see. We don't, but they do. So it's almost like, they create enough rope and they are hanging themselves, you see. So it's actually, the statute is the way that we actually overcome them, I believe.
Because this is evolving, so, as we do things, they do things to counter and so on. But this is evolving. The latest one is along with the remittance slip, other people have created a promissory note, which is literally a piece of paper that says, I promise to pay the bearer the sum of blah, blah, blah. And you sign it, date it. And now that becomes a specie of money according to the Bill of Exchange Act. In fact, the money in your pocket is a promissory note. Somewhere it says, I promise to pay the bearer, and there's somebody's signature on it. And it's actually an invalid promissory note because it's not dated. Or actually, that's wrong. That's actually wrong. It's on demand, so it is dated. It's not actually getting away with stuff. This is the thing you've got to get out of your head, because what's really happening is they're getting away with it. Yeah. You're just coming back into your power and saying, no, I'm not going to give away my signature anymore. This is what you're doing. Your signature is the most powerful thing on this planet. Yeah. Your signature is worth an unlimited amount. And this is the thing we don't realise. We have the power. You can go into a bank, okay, and come away with £100,000 as a loan, yeah? What do they take from you for that £100,000? Your signature. Just your signature. You see the power of that signature now, yeah? So with your signature, if you write your promissory note, you've created money. And that money is your promise to pay. Your promise to work, use your energy, yeah? That's all there is. Your unlimited energy. And that is what the money is. And you supply it, not banks.
Don't assault me! Don't assault me! Don't assault me!
Am I free to go? Listen, mate, I'm asking the questions. You're the public servant. You take your hand off my car, please. Thank you.
I do not consent, officer. I don't consent to remain.
He doesn't consent in the police.
But I am sovereign over my human body, and I do not consent to any search. I do not consent to any authority you feel over me. I am a sovereign British citizen, and I do not wish to be searched.
I am the county court bailiff.
Excuse me, it's our right to film you. It's our right to film you. Yes, it is. Under what law are we not allowed to film you? Yeah, but you have no authority to tell me not to film.
Because we're in a public area.
He's police in the Quincy Police Department. What is your name, sir?
That's good to know, sir.
Yeah, what is your name?
Well, I don't think that by law I have to identify myself if I'm on the sidewalk minding my own business and there's no laws being broken.
You said, look, I can't give you the full section. Can't give you the full section because you can't expect me to know it, your words. Yeah? And I'm saying, well, if I can't expect you to know it, you can't expect me to know it. Can you show us the warrant, please? Can you show us the warrant, please?
Show us your documentation.
Show us the warrant, please, with a wet picnic
I'm not happy with it, honestly. Okay, alright, well, am I being detained right now?
No, you're being detained right now.
Am I free to go?
Sorry?
Am I free to go?
Not at the moment, no, 'cause I need to
Well, am I being detained or arrested right now?
The difference between lawful and legal, as I see it, is lawful relates to common law, the law of the land, the law which governs all people, the original law, which is quite straightforward. To me, it's a case of don't cause any harm or loss or damage to any person, and don't cause that to happen to anybody, and everything's good. And that's pretty straightforward and simple. Everyone can understand what that means. Legal pertains to our legal system and where statutes and acts come from. And it's a system that doesn't actually relate to common law. So we've got these two systems running side by side. We've been fooled into believing that they are one and the same. And so when police are policing the streets, we're enforcing policies, acts and statutes which, when looked into, are not actually necessarily lawful.
Common law is the law of the land, and laid down over centuries of court cases in front of juries, humans making law for humans.
For the severest measure of punishment.
Common law pertains to lawful, and anything outside of lawful falls under the legal or no system at all. The legal system covers all statutes and acts and civil matters. Things like owing money to banks, not paying fines or tax. Basically, anything that isn't criminal. For there to be a crime, there has to be an injured party. In this case, a human. And there are three basic principles that all law needs to apply to. They are as follows. Do not breach the peace. Cause no one else any harm. Cause no one else any loss. Do not use mischief in your promises and agreements. Apart from that, everything else is free rein.
Lawful refers to the natural law, the law of the land. Okay, and that's not causing any harm to anyone, obviously not stealing from anyone, and not using fraud in your contracts. So basically, you're not doing any harm or trying to get one over on anyone else. Legal refers to the statutes, which I mentioned earlier. And the statutes are basically all the rules of society. And not just, we haven't just got the UK statutes, but we've got all the European statutes. So you've literally got tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, of laws, which every day, we could be breaking without knowing.
We all know that you can't go around raping and killing and murdering and invading. We don't need fucking laws for that. Like, we'll deal with that as it comes. But anything other than that, what you want to smoke, where you want to live, where you want to take a shit, who you want to insult, not a fucking other adult on this planet. Like, what are you, my dad? Are you my fucking dad telling me what to do? Like, that's how I feel now when police are like, control freaks try and give it to me.
Legal is essentially according to contract. You have to, there are rules that are sort of handed down to us, but you have to contract with them before they become law. And that law is contract law. You enter into contract, you're bound by it. So yeah, it's two different things. One's overlaid on top of the other.
Parliament has no say in common law and is bound by it. So they create Acts of Parliament, and in the US, Acts of Congress. Because government is a creation of man, and a creation of man can never be above man, they need your consent before they have the force of law.
The principle of by consent, people don't realise, is that we obviously have police because we want them, and that we only have to do what they say if it's reasonable, if we consent to what they're asking to. That is the principle of it for me. Obviously, the larger issue is the assumption that everybody who's walking on this land has been consent to be policed by these people. And that's an assumption that most police officers in this country live by, without realising that it's not true. And this is where diplomatic immunity is a good example of where, actually the consent isn't given and the police don't have the power to act. Another good example that shows it's all about jurisdiction is that our police have no power at all at the American embassy. But that's on our land, isn't it? And that's another example. Embassies are a good example that shows that jurisdiction is portable. It's not tied to land, it's tied to the party. So I can carry my jurisdiction with me, which is the whole principle of sovereignty in general.
My understanding of policing by consent is that, as I said earlier, when a law is passed, for it to be lawful, it has to have the consent of the people. People have to consent to that law and consent to abide by it. But unfortunately, I think we're in a system now where that obviously doesn't happen. But people don't realise that by verbally agreeing with, let's say, a police officer in relating to a parking ticket, that you're entering into a verbal contract, and by agreeing with what the officer is saying, you're consenting to being bound by the law or whatever the law is. And people, when we say words like "do you understand," when a police officer says to you, reads the caution and says "do you understand," what they're actually saying is, do you stand under our authority? Now again, I didn't know this as a police officer, and even the words that are spoken as a police officer, police don't even necessarily understand themselves. So I believe that people have to consent to a law for it to apply to them in the legal sense, because it's not common law.
So when you interact with the police or the court system, they will ask you for your name, address, and date of birth. This is done to create joinder between you and your legal fiction, and to trick you into representing it. Once you agree to represent your legal fiction, now they can deal with you.
They can only apply their legal mechanisms if they have the name of the slave they're dealing with. If you state, well, I don't want to give my name, then they can't apply the mechanisms to you because they have no name for their paperwork. And remember, all their systems work via paperwork. It's all paperwork.
I think you might be wanted. Well, if I'm wanted, what's the problem? Be arrested. Well, then arrest me then, innit? I have decent sabbath for you are. No, you don't. If you think I'm the person that's wanted, arrest me, innit? What a good. Tell me your date of birth.
What? What's that? What do you want? I want your details now. Lock me up for what? Give me your details. Give me your details. Lock me up for what? Give me your details.
Well, get my details. And I tell you this as well. Yeah, I tell you this as well. I'm not a criminal. I'm a peaceful man sitting out here. I just burn down the system of corruption and pollution that we now represent.
But in the meantime, I'll leave you to it. But obviously, if there are any problems, then I might have to come back and obtain your details and speak to you further.
Look, you have no right to just leave me to it. You have no right to say you're going to come back and ask for my details. I'm me, he's him, yeah. You're you. That's our details.
Oh, yeah. Am I obliged to give you my details?
We've spoken to you.
Yes.
Okay, we've asked you to leave the store.
Yes. Wait a second.
Give me your details. You have my details.
Am I obliged to give you my details?
You're not obliged to give me your details.
Oh, great, okay.
Why?
How are you defining yourself under the sex crime definition?
Am I obliged to answer that, sir? I did not wish to answer any questions, sir.
You don't have to. I'm just asking you.
Am I obliged?
You're not obliged.
I'm not obliged. No comment.
Okay, that's fine.
What are you doing? Am I obliged to answer that, sir?
No?
No comment.
Okay. Are you going to answer any of my questions?
If I'm obliged, I will, but if I'm not obliged, then I won't be answering any questions.
Alright, that's fine.
Are you going to tell us your name or not? Am I obliged?
And then you're getting out your van and coming over and trying to intimidate me. Go back to your van and go away, there'll be no complaints. Stay here, I'll be speaking to your sergeant about all of you.
Right, so you're demanding now, are you? Or you're requesting that I give you my details? Right, well, I would politely decline your request.
Why is that? What's your reason for declining?
Privacy.
You got an ID or driver's license on yourself?
Yeah.
Yep. I don't do it. What's your name and badge?
Officer Carlson, ID 7345.
Let me in the team, my friend.
Free to go whenever you want to.
Thanks, sir.
I'm asking again, am I obliged to give you my details?
I'd like it because I'm going to do a name check.
I got it.
I'd like to see it.
I got it.
If you're banned from
Okay.
this area or
Okay. Well, I'm asking you again. I know you'd like to. Well, the reason, just to explain to you, the reason I don't like to give my details is because I don't trust where those details go. Do you understand?
You won't know as well as I know, sir, that in order for you to ask me my name, you have to suspect me of committing a crime. You know and I know that you don't suspect me of committing a crime. You're just poking around where you don't belong.
Okay, is there a problem, officer? Constable.
Basically, under section 163 of the Road Traffic Act, I'm allowed to collect your documents.
Of course you are. And I know I'm not obliged to give any details whatsoever. However, I'd like to know, is there a problem?
I don't even have to speak to you unless you're going to arrest me, mate.
You got some mental health problems?
No, mate. No, I didn't know my right to remain silent.
Yes, you did, mate. When the camera's not on. That's what you said. Okay?
Phone number.
Right, no, I haven't got a contact phone number. I'm not obliged to give any contact phone number. All I would like now is my card back. I've not accepted any paperwork from you guys, and I want to go on my way. I'm going to be detained right now.
Legally, you're meant to confirm your name and address to me.
Lawfully, hold on, lawfully.
Yeah, lawfully.
You're supposed to answer me. You're a public servant.
What? No, you can't see my ID. Can I see your ID? I'm glad you brought that up. Can I see your ID? I see your...
As a member of the vehicle, you're going to have to give us your details, okay? I don't have to give you any details. You're going to have to. Call the sergeant, mate. I don't have to give you any details.
No, ma'am, you may not.
I'm talking to investigating something now.
You're investigating me for what crime?
I didn't say it was a crime.
Okay, then there's no probable cause or reasonable suspicion for me to provide it.
Because
And then what would you do if I was to say that I don't have a name? Like, how would you look me up or anything like that?
Well, we wouldn't. Because if I stop you like this to have a chat, and I ask you your name, you don't have to tell me.
Yeah, no, I'm just glad you know that, because a lot of police officers where I'm from don't actually know that.
You don't have to give me a name. The only time you have to give me a name,
caught me breaking the law.
or, well no, even then you don't, because you can be booked in as unknown.
I suppose, yeah, I could replace.
The only time you're legally obliged to give your name, address and date of birth is when you drive in a car.
If you haven't broken any laws, you don't have to do anything. You don't have to interact with the police if you don't want to. If they come up and try and engage you in conversation, and you haven't done anything, then you don't have to engage in conversation with them. You're free to walk away. If they want to detain you, they need reasonable grounds to do that. And if they don't have reasonable grounds to do that, then they're actually in breach of their oath, and they're liable.
With statutes and acts, the consent of the people, those are the people that are there to govern, has not been obtained. And so, it's frowned upon. It's very much a grey area, and police are being used to enforce statutes and acts of the legal system, and not really understanding what that means and what it means as a police officer to police.
I believe that Black's Law Dictionary states that a statute is a legislative rule of a society given the force of law by those who consent. So a statute it doesn't actually say a statute is a law, it says it's a legislative rule of a society given the force of law, but only by those who consent to being in that society or consent to the fact that consent to the law. So if you say to a policeman when they stop you, I'm sorry, I do not consent, I do not understand, that is, I do not stand under you. And you can step away from that. But it's important that you uphold the actual natural law. And of course the policemen and magistrates and also the Queen, they all state oaths to the law of the land. So you can ask an officer if he's actually, are you on your oath? So it's important that we can actually get them on their oath, because they don't swear an oath to uphold the law of the sea or statutes. They swear an oath to uphold the law of the land.
If you're pulled up by the police and the police say to you, can I have your name? And you say no, which officially you don't have to give your name. It's actually on the Metropolitan Police site itself. It actually says you don't have to answer their questions. But if you don't answer their questions, they're going to do one of two things. If you get a good copper, they're going to go, okay, not a problem, you haven't really done anything wrong, we'll leave you alone. You get a bad copper, then you're going to get dragged to the floor, roughed about, cuffs on, you'll be dragged down the station, where you will be bullied and coerced into giving your name in the end. And if you don't, they will just keep you as long as they possibly can. To lock any human being in a room that they can't leave, and especially in a room that has the very, very bare essentials, is torture.
So remember, if you haven't broken any laws, no one has the right to tell you what to do. We are all equal in the eyes of the law, from the Queen to the police and to you or I, and we are all innocent until proven guilty. So if a policeman stops you in the street and you haven't broken any laws, do not comply. Always ask, am I detained? Or, am I free to go? Do not give your details and ask if you're obliged to. If they do try to search you or arrest you, without your consent, tell them you are doing this under duress. If you have not broken the law, do not comply. Only interact with the police if you wish to. If you do not wish to, do not consent. The more of us that do not comply, the less likely this country will become like Nazi Germany or Communist China. The police swear an oath to the Queen, so ask them if they are under their oath. If they reply yes, are bound by said oath and can only uphold common law.
This is certainly the most updated. When I joined, it was slightly differently worded to this, but this is probably the most updated, and it starts with I, you state your name, of, you state whichever police force you are serving, do solemnly and sincerely declare and affirm that I will well and truly serve the Queen in the office of Constable, with fairness, integrity, diligence and impartiality, upholding fundamental human rights and according equal respect to all people, and that I will, to the best of my power, cause the peace to be kept and preserved, and prevent all offences against people and property, and that while I continue to hold the said office, I will, to the best of my skill and knowledge, discharge all the duties thereof faithfully according to law. That is the oath and attestation of a police constable.
If you ask a policeman to say, are you on your oath, very often they change their, they actually realise what you're talking about, and they change their behaviour, because their oath was to uphold the common law of the land, and not the statutes, not the law of the sea, which is the law of commerce. Because we realise that everything now is to do with commerce. When the policemen stop us, you're not wearing a seatbelt. Well, who am I causing harm to? Where's the loss or damage? It's crazy. And so they say, oh no, you're breaking the law. Well, I'm just breaking the rule, but why? What authority do they have over us? I haven't given them my authority.
The oath of every police officer is to preserve the property, life and subjects of the Queen. Now that to me is people, property, disturbances, breach of the peace. That's how I understand the office of constable to be now. It's basically an oath is a promise. I promise to enforce the law. I promise to serve Her Majesty's subjects. I promise to prevent them as much as I can, prevent them from being harmed, to prevent their property from being destroyed. That to me is the oath of a constable.
Police take an oath when they join the service. Again, they don't really understand what that means. It's not explained in any details. It's kind of a grey area. You just take it to mean whatever you want it to mean. But it's all been set up to allow the system that currently enslaves people to carry on enslaving and to further that enslavement into every aspect of our lives.
Hey guys, so I'm here at Parliament Square for the Occupy London protest. I've just come over to a group of police officers who are protecting and serving people today. I've just approached this guy here who obviously who's vacuuming me now. What's your name, please, sir? Obviously you're obliged to tell me. It's your job as a public servant to identify yourself. So could I have your name, please? Okay, we have here Constable Bird. It's a pleasure to meet you, sir. I have here about 200 copies of the UK police officer's oath of office. I've just asked them if they know their oath. They've gone very quiet on me. This isn't an attack on you guys, just so you know. Like, I'm not trying to cause trouble with you or anything. I'm just trying to make sure you do your job properly, obviously. I mean, some emergencies just come up, so I'm going to follow them just to see why they're avoiding my questions. I think we all know it's because they don't know their oath. But I'd like to offer them a copy just to see if they will remember why they became police officers, which was obviously to protect and serve the people of this country. But if during their programming and their training and stuff have forgotten who they actually went into the job for, I'd like to remind them. So I still have the oath in my hand, like you can see all the copies. They're walking away from me. They don't want to hear it. My aim at this protest is obviously to help the police remember their oath, to remember what it is that gives them this authority in the first place, and hopefully they will honour humanity and uphold. Let me just read their oath to you guys. Look, they're really walking away from the square and everything. They don't want to hear this at all. I, so-and-so of wherever, do solemnly and sincerely declare and affirm that I will well and truly serve the Queen in the office of Constable with fairness, integrity and diligence and impartiality, upholding fundamental human rights and according equal respect to all people. And that I will, to the best of my power, cause the peace to be kept and preserved, and prevent all offences against people and property. Where was I? Prevent all offences against people and property, and that while I continue to hold the said office, I will, to the best of my skill and knowledge, discharge all the duties thereof faithfully according to law. So could you now recite that back to me? This is going on the internet, by the way. Not even an acknowledgement from them, guys. This is what we're dealing with. They've just completely ignored all attempts and walked off to their van and gone away. What are we supposed to do? I'm not giving up. I've got about 200 copies of their oath of office that I'm going to give out to them, and I'm going to ask them to uphold it and say, will you honour this oath and remember why you started this job? And hopefully, fingers crossed, some of them remember that it's the people that they work for. So wish us luck, guys, because we're on a mission to convert these guys to truth and love. Wish us luck. Namaste.
How are you sure?
Excuse me. Take your hands out of my camera.
I've seen many sort of videos on YouTube and the like recently where people have been filming encounters with police officers, and they've basically been told that they can't film. But if you look at the Metropolitan Police's official website, it actually states that you can film police officers. If it's in a public domain, if it's in a private domain, then obviously that may well be different, because there's certain laws of corporations and whatever that may prevent that. But certainly if you take a camera or a phone and you record the encounter, there's nothing illegal about that at all. It maybe help as a witness as an accurate account of what's being said, so there's sort of no ambiguity at a later stage. But certainly not illegal to film anyone in a public domain.
There are simply no laws preventing you from filming in public. This also includes the filming of the police performing their duties. Here is a letter that was sent in 2010 to all police stations regarding filming in public. Dear colleagues, guidance for photographers. I am writing to you in my capacity as chair of the ACPO, Communications Advisory Group, which sits in the presidential business area. There have been a number of instances highlighted in the press where officers have detained and deleted images from their cameras. I seek your support in reminding your officers and staff that they should not prevent anyone from taking photographs in public. This applies equally to members of the media and public seeking to record images who do not need a permit to photograph or film in public places. ACPO guidance is as follows. There are no powers prohibiting the taking of photographs, film, or digital images in public places. Therefore, members of the public and press should not be prevented from doing so. We need the cooperation with the media and amateur photographers. They play a vital role as their images help us identify crime. We must acknowledge that citizen journalism is a feature of modern life, and police officers are now photographed and filmed more than ever. Unnecessarily restricting photography, whether for the casual tourist or professional, is unacceptable, and it undermines public confidence in the police service. Once an image has been recorded, the police have no power to delete or confiscate it without a court order. Yours sincerely, Andrew Trotter, Chief Constable, Chair of ACPO Communications Advisory Group.
As a professional television cameraman or a member of the public, I am allowed to stand in the street and shoot. I don't need 4 police officers or wardens or whatever you are when I stop to do this. This is absolutely bloody ridiculous. And I'm fed up with every single time that I do this of being stopped and being questioned and being treated like some kind of criminal. Oh, for God's sake, this is Windsor Castle. There are 1 million people around here with cameras. Do you think a terrorist would stand here with a tripod and make it bloody obvious? Or do you think a tripod would just get a terrorist would get a home video camera out and shoot?
Obviously, I'm wasting my time talking to you.
You clearly are. Thank you very much. Let me get on with my day.
I'm not arguing, I'm asking you a question. Can I film anything in public, in the public? If it's against the law to film in public, then everybody with a camera would be breaking the law, wouldn't they?
What is the actual law saying I'm not allowed to film you?
Nothing. There is no law saying you can't.
Okay.
There is only one act that gives police blanket powers to search the public, and this is Section 60 of the Criminal Justice and Public Order Act 1994. But this needs to be authorized by an inspector or above, and only if he or she suspects that instances involving serious violence may take place and that persons are carrying dangerous instruments or offensive weapons. The order will cover a specific area, normally a town or suburb, for a period of no longer than 24 hours. In a nutshell, if there has been a riot or a gang fight or something of that nature, a Section 60 may be brought into force, and anyone in that area can be searched without reasonable grounds for suspicion. All other bases for searches need reasonable grounds for suspicion, and they must follow go wisely. Officers conducting a stop and search will work through a process called go wisely. If officers do not follow go wisely, they leave themselves open to an assault allegation and the search itself being unlawful. The police currently have over 20 stop and search powers. They are mainly for weapons, drugs, stolen property, or articles intended to damage property. Those made using powers from Section 1 of the Police and Criminal Evidence Act, commonly referred to as PACE searches, are the most common. Go Wisely is a mnemonic that was created so the police could easily remember the terms laid down in Section 1 of PACE. Section 1 of PACE is the foundation document for all searches that require reasonable grounds for suspicion. In this modern age, it is very easy to download the documents from the website supplied, such as Section 1 of PACE, a breakdown of Go Wisely, etc., and keep them on your mobile phone, so if you do ever have an encounter with the police, you have evidence straight away to show them that you know what they require to make the encounter legal. If a police officer insists on searching you, do not resist. It will only end one way. Tell the officer that you are alarmed and distressed and you are being searched under duress, and make it very clear that you do not agree with the search and only sign the paperwork if you want to. Signing the paperwork means you agree to being searched. Take a lesson from the previous section and always film your encounters with the police. This tactic works twofold. Normally, when you pull a camera out, the police completely change their attitude and work to a more professional standard. Secondly, you have evidence of the entire encounter in case the police officer tries to make any false allegations against you. If you are being searched under the Misuse of Drugs Act 1971, the police officer must comply to Go Wisely as laid out in PACE Section 1. The root power for the search comes from PACE Section 1, and they must adhere to it. If the police do not follow PACE Section 1, then the search can be considered unlawful and an assault charge can be filed against the officer or officers, as with R v Bristol 2007, where the police refused to give their name and the station they were dispatched from. From the mnemonic, go wisely, the most important aspects for you to question are grounds, object, and lawful reason. Ask the officer what are the grounds for the search and the object of the search, what he thinks he will find, and what laws allow him to do this. This is important because the police have to justify why they have stopped you and record this, and asking the questions makes it harder for them to stop you without reason. The point to all this information is, the police cannot search you unless a Section 60 is in place without reasonable suspicion. You can, in such cases as a drug search, refuse by not giving consent, as laid out in the Drugs Act 2005. Here is an example of how this information can help you and possibly make the police treat you with a little more due diligence.
If I can be searched under Section 23, misuse of drugs.
I do not consent to the search.
You don't get a choice, my friend.
How do you mean I don't get... Wait, hold on. I don't consent to the search, and you just told me I don't get a choice, yeah? Wait, you're telling me I don't get a choice, yeah? Wait. Because you're a public servant. I'm going to let you search me after you answer my questions. You're telling me I don't have a choice, yeah? That's what you're saying. I don't have a choice, yeah?
What gains you?
Is I don't have a choice. No. You're a public servant. I'm allowed to record you. And plus, do you know what? You can take my phone and smash it. This is live streaming. You can take the phone, it's live streaming, it's going to save straight into my laptop. So you can try to confiscate it all you like. I've got you on camera. You just said I don't have a choice. Don't touch my phone, that's assault. You just touch my hand. If I did that to you, I'll get nicked for assault. Don't do it to me.
Well, I'm not here for nicking people for assault.
Yeah, well, don't do it to me.
Okay. What I can say is see that as everything.
You can't.
Yes, I can.
No, you can't. It doesn't matter because I still got it on my laptop. It's a live stream. Go on, what you searching me for?
What I'm saying is, come out that bin, yeah, his hand's gone down and dropped something behind the bin.
Alright, yeah.
Alright? Yeah, you.
Alright.
Which gives me the reason to believe the fact you're down an alleyway for no real reason.
I just told you, yeah?
I'll tell you what I'm going to do. We're going to walk up to that bin.
Yeah.
And if I see anything down there,
yeah,
I'm going to turn a pair of you over.
Alright, cool.
Then we're good, yeah? Walk up then.
You walk up.
I'm going to walk after you, my friend.
You're a public servant and you're not following your duties properly.
Listen, our duties, okay?
Your duties are to uphold the law of the land, and that's it. Nothing else. Nothing else. You're not obliged to tell them, but you don't have to tell them. And I'm telling him the law, innit, just in case he doesn't know. He doesn't have to tell you. I will not calm down. You don't have to tell them your name, so if you want to, you can, but if you don't. Yeah? You never found nothing, you're not going to search me, that was your deal, innit? Cool. And now I need to ask you a question. Are you working in accordance to the oath that you took to become a police officer?
I need to answer that question.
Of course you do, you're a public service. You're a public servant, you have to answer all questions.
How do you feel about being searched for knocking on the door?
I feel like an animal. I feel like I'm being thrown against the wall and told to empty my pockets.
Yeah?
This is like a legit gang.
How often do you get stopped and searched?
Every day.
Every day?
Every day.
If you are being stopped by the police under Section 163 of the Road Traffic Act, which allows the police to stop a person driving a mechanically propelled vehicle, you could argue that you are not a person and that you're not driving, you are just travelling, which would all be true but will probably get you nowhere. They will then most probably move on to Section 164, which grants them the power to ask for your driver's license, so they can confirm your details and that you're legally allowed to drive the car. Now, since this is an act we're talking about, there is no law saying that you must give your name, but by having a driver's license, registering your car, and paying road tax, you sort of agree to it through conduct, to the rules of the Road Traffic Act, that is. The best advice here is to stay in your car and roll your window down, just enough so you can hear the officer and they can hear you. The police have no right to ask you to step out of your vehicle. Ask them why they have stopped you. If they reply Section 163, Section 164, or Section 165 of the Road Traffic Act, it is just to check documents, so give them your license or give them your details. If they require any further details, for example, your insurance documents, ask them for a producer. This is laid out in Section 165 and allows you 7 days to produce documents at a police station of your choice. This could also be the key to not having your car towed if the police cannot confirm you have insurance. It is clearly laid out in Section 165 that you have 7 days to produce your documents before it becomes an offence. The police have no right to grab your key out of your vehicle if they're stopping you under Section 163, 164 or 165 of the Road Traffic Act. If you wish, respectively decline to answer any other questions. Officers have to be in uniform to enforce the Road Traffic Act as it is a statute. Plainclothes officers cannot use Section 163, Section 164 or Section 165 of the Road Traffic Act or enforce any statutes or acts that do not contain a criminal element. Through extensive research, the makers of this documentary now believe that the majority of pace, stop and searches and stops under the Road Traffic Act, Section 163, are for intelligence gathering purposes, and this is why they are on the increase and officers are not trained or forced to remember the wording of individual acts, as it would contradict with what they are doing.
Welcome to Hertfordshire Constabulary. If you know the name or the warrant number of the person you wish to speak to, please press 1.
A new trend is occurring with police searches, and it has to do with the taking of mobile phones to check the IMEI numbers.
Yeah, so I'm fine, thank you. You don't want to give the officers your details? Yeah. What, is there a reason for that? Because I haven't committed any crime and I don't think I'm obliged to. No, you don't have to. Yeah. What we will do is we do an IMEI check on your phone though. We have been told to do that. What's that? Check your phone to make sure it belongs to you. It belongs to me. It's given by my girlfriend. Yeah, we're entitled to do that, okay? Okay. So if you hand your phone over to the officers and we'll do a check on that. Okay. You have to do that. Sorry? Yeah, am I obliged to give you my phone? Yeah, you are. Alright. We check to make sure I've got that on record.
Now everyone has a mobile phone, and I would think it very difficult for them to say they had reasonable grounds to suspect that the phone was stolen, unless the officer's information was intelligence-based. After an extensive search online, nothing came up, so I called the police to ask them. Here is that conversation.
Yeah, hi mate. I don't know if I've come through to the right number or not, but I just got a really quick question about police procedures. Yeah, a friend of mine a couple of weeks ago was stopped in the street. It wasn't in Hertfordshire, it was in London. But he was, when he was stopped, they took his mobile phone off him and said they were doing an IMEI check. What is the legality behind that? Because I couldn't see anything online on the website or on the police website or what act it is or what powers they're using to do that.
There's no particular powers required to do that. If they believe that it could be a stolen phone or they're checking the legality of the phone to check that it isn't stolen, then we have a link with the monitoring company that provides the EMEI numbers.
Oh, okay, so there's nothing I could... There's nothing I can find online that actually says this is a part of a pace or part of an act or anything like that. It's just quite legit.
No. It's the old-fashioned sort of, the old terms, stuff to deal, you know.
Yeah.
If they've got a reason to believe, then they've got right to check their IMEI number. If there's no problem concern it's stolen, then they have to deal with it.
Okay. Can someone refuse, or is it mandatory?
Yeah, you can refuse. But if they've got reasonable cause to believe, then they can take the phone and the person to the police station for further inquiries.
As you can hear from the conversation, the police need reasonable grounds for suspicion. That means they must suspect that your phone has been stolen before they can take it and perform an IMEI number check. This seems to be a new police tactic to try and gain your details through underhanded and mischievous means. A breach of the peace is an old common law concept which is used to prevent unlawful violence against people or property. A breach of the peace is not a criminal offence in itself. However, special powers exist for the purpose of stopping or preventing anyone from breaching or threatening a breach of the peace by committing unlawful violence. A breach of the peace are actions which harm another person or harm his property in his presence, are actions that are likely to provoke such harm. A breach of the peace may occur on public or private property. There is no criminal offence for breach of the peace for which someone can be prosecuted. The power exists to prevent a breach of the peace. An arrest can be made, but only to remove someone from the situation or if an imminent breach is reasonably anticipated. This means that if you are arrested for a breach of the peace, or to prevent a breach of the peace, you cannot be charged or prosecuted, as it is a preventional power. A breach of the peace is covered more extensively later in this documentary in the section regarding bailiffs. Section 5 is probably one of the most abused powers the police have in their arsenal, and a police officer can arrest without warrant if he believes you are in breach of this section. Since February 2014, the word insulting has been removed from the Act to move into line with Article 10 of the Human Rights Act. This means you can say whatever you wish as long as it's not aggressive in nature or provoking violence. The best advice is to stay calm and not swear or make threats, and as long as you have not broken the law, harm, injury or loss to a fellow human, you will be fine. Just remember this, most police officers respect being respected, and you will have a greater chance of moving on with your day if you do so. But always stand up for your rights. These are the most common types of police interactions, but there are many more acts they could use to try and stop you in your everyday life. Just remember that it is all online, and you have the right to check if you doubt what the police officer is telling you. What you are watching here are the police violently arresting protesters for small infractions such as not listening to a police command, not giving details, or Section 5 public disorder. They have committed no crime and are now essentially being tortured. The police seem to be able to get away with horrendous acts towards people and in some cases treat the general public worse than criminals. For example, imagine someone is arrested for assault, then taken back to a police station and refused to give his name. Would the police then throw him to the ground and assault him until he gives his name? The answer in most cases is a resounding no. That would be torture. Article 3 of the Human Rights Act, that was incorporated into English law in 1998, states, "No one shall be subject to torture or inhumane or degrading treatment or punishment. Another case similar to this would be smashing someone's window to enforce the Road Traffic Act, essentially breaking a law to enforce an act, a rule. The police need to go back to policing, preventing a breach of the peace and protecting people and property. Upholding rules should never be done by force. You are a sovereign entity, and no one has the right to tell you what you should or shouldn't do, or how you conduct your life, if you haven't broken any laws. If someone had that power over you, then you would be a slave. Think about it. As covered in the first part of this documentary, money does not exist. It is a figment of our imaginations and is backed by nothing. When you borrow money from a bank, they don't take it from their vault and give it to you. Instead, you fill out an agreement, sign it, and they tap on their computers, and hey presto, the money is brought into existence. For a contract to be legal, it must have equal worth. The bank basically gives you nothing and expect you, using your own human labor, which is the most valuable commodity on the planet, to work to pay it back. This alone renders the contract void. Debt, and the whole industry associated with it, is central to the control system that surrounds you. Possibly the only times that you feel intimidated in your life is for police encounters for non-criminal activities and when you owe money to a creditor, and then consequently the debt collectors or bailiffs they send after you. How, in 2015, do we still have scenes like this? Contracts and debt can never be remedied by force. We will show you that debt collectors and bailiffs have no powers, except in very extreme circumstances, and only as a last resort, meaning everything you're watching here is completely unlawful. Even when force is authorized, it is classified as reasonable force and cannot be used against a human. Owing money is not a crime, and you can never go to prison for not paying a debt. The whole of the debt industry runs on fear and ignorance.
So now when debt collectors call, the first thing, well, not that they call me anymore, but if they did call me, I think now the first thing I would do is say, thank you very much for paying off my debt. That's really kind of you. And they say, what do you mean? I said, well, you bought my debt. You might have only paid 10p in the pound for it, but as far as I'm concerned, you've paid off my bank account. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. So, yeah, and the great thing is you can have a laugh with them, because you don't take it. What happened when they first started calling me, I used to get really nervous and my voice would start going all wavy. And, my heart would start going and I'd be on the phone to them because I felt really guilty, because I felt I'd done something terribly wrong, getting into debt, And then I realised that the whole system is designed to get us into debt and designed to, the fact is the debts can't be paid off. And every single politician that comes on the television says, oh, we've got to make cuts and, we've got to do this. And they're trying to cut our little local hospital down here in Swanage. Well, the fact is that it doesn't matter how many cuts we make, we can never pay off the national debt. Or we can't even keep up with the interest on it because it's growing exponentially. And so this is all part of this control mechanism to keep us bored, to keep not enough to go round. When in fact, if it wasn't for the money, we would have complete abundance.
With debt collectors, people assume when a debt collector comes round that they have actual power to do something to you. Anything to you. They don't. They have no power whatsoever. They only have the power that you give to them. They're kind of like third-party, strangers, interlopers. They're kind of interfering in your financial affairs. You didn't contact with them. You don't know who they are. They've just turned up on your doorstep, demanding money. Who are they? So what they do is they bully you or trick you into contracting with them. And if you contract with them, now you've got a contract with them, they can chase you for money and hound you for money. They have a legal right to come after you. But they have nothing until you give them. And one of the tricks they do is they might say, give us £1 a week or £1 a month. Just give us £1 a month. That sounds kind of reasonable. Especially if you really genuinely believe that you have a debt to pay. It sounds quite reasonable. But as soon as you start paying them £1 a month, you've just said that you owe them something. So you've contracted it with them. So now that you have to pay them the amount, and that's what usually happens. They'll come after you for the full amount because now they have the authority that you've given them to chase that amount.
I've got very little time for debt collectors. I think I've called them everything from the detritus of the human psyche to the scarred baton bearers of old that would wait around the corner waiting to pounce on the innocent and the unwary and those unable to defend themselves. Because the funny thing about debt collectors is, as soon as you show you know what they're talking about, they disappear. So they are actually only there to bully money from those who don't know how to take a stand or don't know what their rights are. A very low opinion of debt collectors.
To the people who are worried about debt, let me quote a friend of mine who I will call Jay, because I'm not going to name him, because he still works for the Royal Bank of Scotland. He's a credit risk underwriter for Royal Bank of Scotland, quite high up. And on the trading floor and all the kind of stuff he does, they have a saying: the only person that owns a debt is the person who worries about it. And it's as simple as that. Don't worry about your debt. It's not real. Okay, it's real in the extent you fucking agreed, but it's not. No one's going to die, nothing bad's going to happen, no one's going to get thrown in debtor's prison because it doesn't exist anymore. The reason why Western capitalism is crumbling is because people are starting to be wise to the fact that it's a big bullshit circus charade run by those in charge to make sure that they stay rich. And it's common knowledge in the BBC, Guardian, New York Times that in the last 5 years of recession, the rich have become fucking much richer and the poor have become poorer. If that's not enough cause for revolution, I don't know what is. But the only thing that holds people back with anything is fear.
My advice to deal with debt collectors or to deal with anybody else is get informed. If you understand what you're talking about, you have a much more powerful position than if you don't know. If you don't know what you're talking about, you are at the mercy of people who pretend to know what they're talking about. My advice is get informed, understand your rights, understand their rights, what they can do and what they can't do, and then you're in a much better position to fend off any illegality or anything that goes against what should be done.
Since the financial decline starting around 2007 to present, caused by the banks and then subsequently bailed out by public money, the effects of which are still being felt across the world. Since 2007, suicide rates in males between 35 and 55 have skyrocketed and can be directly related to debt.
Oh, right. So you had to go to another eviction in Hollywood and the bloke had hung himself?
Oh my God.
Oh no.
It's not good, is it?
Really?
It's not
Seriously?
good. Our heart goes out to
Bloody
everybody.
hell.
everybody. Right, well, I'll just make this question.
This is what's going on.
Have you finished with us today?
Also, suicide rates in postgraduate students has risen drastically and can be directly attributed to debt. Before we continue, you must realize that no one has power over you. The system that surrounds you is just an illusion, created by the mind of man. Owing money or breaching a contract can never be remedied by force. And in this game of cat and mouse, knowledge is your most powerful weapon.
What are you gonna do? What are you gonna do? Take it back.
What is that? What is he doing? Stop that! You're being really stupid.
Can you show us the warrant, please?
Show us your documentation.
Show us the warrant, please. We're waiting to take it
Oh, can you sorry, I'm just asking you, as a human being to another human being, my dear, I just wonder what would motivate people to work for debt collection agencies. Because all you do is pass it to people.
So you've not got the original credit agreement with a wet ink on it, so you've got no proof of claim. Have you got the deed of assignment, mate?
Well, the reason is, all the other debt companies before you tried to get some money out of me and didn't manage it. I'm just wondering what makes you think that I'm going to pay you anything.
So what the council's done is handed it on to a different set of private bailiff called Marston, High Court Enforcement Officers and Certified Bailiffs.
Right, I'll just tell you something now, right? Council tax, yeah? You cannot force MCs, go and bully somebody else. Yeah? I hope you enjoyed wasting your time. See ya!
See you later! Bye-bye!
Hey, see how quick you just fuck off?
Horrible, aren't they?
My name is John Witterick, and I have a website called getoutofdebtfree.org. And basically what we do, we help people realise that the whole banking system is basically fraudulent, and we offer them the tools to actually challenge the banking system and basically get themselves out of this fictitious debt. The services we offer are, we offer template letters. We also offer start off with, if you're working with debt collectors, if you're dealing with debt collectors, we've actually got a very simple way of dealing with them, which is basically addressee not recognised, return to sender, because it will always have your name either in uppercase letters, or it will have a title called Mr. or Mrs, and you can say, well, hang on, that's not me, I'm not the title, I don't spell my name in uppercase letters, so the addressee is not recognised. So that's one way. The other way we deal with the banking system or debt collectors is basically say, well, where did the money come from, and have I got a valid contract with you? And if I haven't, and if you can't prove that I have, then we are agreed to the following terms. And we send out a series of letters about 10 days apart. So, but it tends to prove to be very successful. What it was, I used the method myself quite a few years ago, and was astounded how easily that actually these companies just gave up. And so all I did, I got a website together and actually shared this information.
GetOutOfDebtFree.org is a site that has been set up to help people dealing with the agony of debt. And the template letters just need you to adjust a few details and they're ready to go. Get Out of Debt Free has already helped thousands of people to get out of debt, and the combined amount of money saved so far is over £12 million. And that's just from the people who have reported their success to the site. The forum is a large part of the site and is broken down into different sections such as bailiffs, debt collectors, credit card companies, etc. It is full of people who will fall over themselves to help you, and with a wealth of knowledge and experience who will make sure you are not alone.
So the important thing is that you have to keep hitting the ball back in the net. What you're doing, whatever they send you, you have to reply to it and send it back. Now, after you've sent them the 3 letters, also what's included in the letters are a fee schedule. And the fee schedule says, well, look, every time you send me a letter, if we can't agree, if you can't prove that I owe you anything, then we're going to agree to the following terms. And, you don't call me anymore. And if you do, it's going to cost you this much. And every time I have to write a letter to you, it's going to cost you this much. So what you do, you send them the fee schedule. And, of course, if they do send you anything or contact you, you then start totting it up. And after a while, what you do, you send them an invoice. And if they don't pay the invoice, you can then get onto the small claims court online and actually start, pursuing them for the money. So, what you've got to think is the only power they have over us is fear. Now, when the fear goes and you start challenging them, do you think they really want to deal with you if you're going to be invoicing when there's all these people go, oh, like I was, really nervous, and they're going, all right, well, I should owe them some money to get to the stage, right? No, hang on, mate, you've actually sent me 3 letters. I actually charge £500 a letter now. That's 1,500 quid plus the 2 phone calls at £100. So we're up to about 1,800 quid. So basically, when are you going to pay? How are you going to pay?
Debt collectors, really, the common term that's used for them is a third-party intervener, which is you have an arrangement or you had an arrangement with an organisation. Because that organisation have contracted with a third party, which is the debt collector, there's some implication that you have to deal with them. You don't. Nobody has any. You have no obligation to deal with them whatsoever, and they know it. Really, doesn't matter how well they've been empowered by their company. You have no need to deal with them whatsoever. And as long as you're firm and clear about that from outset, then your relationship should go a little bit smoother. The other thing I would say is, first of all, in any interaction with any debt collector, at your first communication, let them know that you don't want to have anything to do with them for whatever motives or morals or ethics you feel. But also let them know that any future time they take of yours will be charged. And let them know that that is the terms of your engagement with them. And you can set your charges as you see fit.
Now, one of the things that that people often miss when the pennies on the pound. So if you apparently owe £1,000, they've probably paid a tenner for it. But the point is, they've paid off your debt. So thank you very much. Did I actually go into contract with you to say that I'd pay you back for that? You should have probably asked me first before you went around paying off my debt for me. So where's the fear in that? These guys rely on fear to make you pay up. If you realise that they've got no power over you, and in fact they've paid off your debt, thank you very much. Where's the fear?
All you're asking from them is an invoice for the amount they say you owe.
Yeah.
And nothing comes back.
Well, they can't supply what we're asking for. They can't supply, and we know they can't supply that. But we asked for a contract. We also use contract law because that goes back years, and it's how we would deal with each other. But we'd say, can you give us a copy of the contract signed by both parties? And sometimes on loans you'll get a little squiggle, but no name against it. But the thing is, because they are a fictitious entity and we are a living, breathing soul, we cannot contract under contract law with a fictitious entity.
So it's got to be equal to equal, really.
It has. Yeah. That's what contract. That's what contract law says. Yeah.
debt collectors have no rights of entry. If they turn up at your door, they can only negotiate how you will pay, nothing more. If they make threats pertaining to more power than they actually have, then they are breaking the law. Normally sending the 3 letters as described in the previous section, plus an estoppel, is usually enough, and it works in nearly all cases. If an agent of a debt collection company turns up at your door, you do not have to deal with them unless you want to. The best thing to do is to not open the door and wait until they go away. If you open the door, go outside and close the door behind you. Take your phone and film the encounter. Tell them you do not want to deal with anyone at the door or over the phone, only by post. Ask them to leave your property, and if they don't, or make threats, call the police. They will have no warrants, so the police must ask them to leave, as it is a civil case. They have no power, only empty threats.
We deal with bailiffs quite differently from how we deal with debt collectors. So if bailiffs suddenly say, "Oh, we want some money," the first thing we would do is, if they contact you by post first, and we would just make a differentiation. We're talking about not court bailiffs, but we're talking about private bailiffs. And so for banks and things like that, it's always private bailiffs. So court bailiffs are a little bit different and a little bit specialised. So, but if you're dealing with debts, as you know, and the website is, we'd be talking about private bailiffs. Now, very few powers, if any. So the first thing you do, you send them a removal of implied rights of access. So you send them a document you can download off the website, which removes their implied rights of access. Now, what you're doing, you're removing that common law right from the bailiff to be on your property, which means that as soon as he sets foot on your property, then he's committing a trespass, which you can then sue him for. So you make that very clear to him. You can then put that notice on the door or on a window so that it's visible when they actually come onto your property. That's the first thing you do. It's a good idea that everything you do, if they actually turn up at your property, the first thing you do, ideally, if you've got a front and back door, you'd go out the back door, lock it behind you, okay, and then go round to the front and meet the bailiff. Make sure you have a camera at all times and do everything. Notepads are great. If you have a notepad and a pen as well, if there's 2 of you, one with a notepad and a pen, another with a camera, it automatically you're watching them. They realise they're being challenged, and that they can't push you about if you're recording everything, and you're well within your rights to do this. The other thing you ask them with the bailiffs, you always ask them, "Can I see a signed warrant from the court?" Now it has to be signed by an actual judge, not signed by anyone else. It is very unlikely they will have this. Unless they have this and give it to you to read, and you can then read it through, take notes. But you can then say, right, I then want to contact the court and actually ensure that this person that signed it is in fact who they say it is. Otherwise you're here, under false pretences, and this is fraudulent. Very often, it's very rare that they actually have anything signed by a judge.
So, gentlemen, there's bailiffs on the doorstep. The concept of illegal debts, and how you actually deal with them when they're on your doorstep. So who'd like to take that?
First thing you've got to understand is that the standard bailiffs have no power whatsoever. They will tell you they can come in your property whenever they want and remove property. They cannot. They're like vampires. You have to allow them in once. If you've allowed them in, they can come back and possibly break into your property and remove it. If you don't let them in the first place, there's nothing they can do. My son was dealing with a particular bailiff called Equita, who were threatening to come around and remove his property. And he showed me the letter, and he got a little worried because it says, "We would prefer you to be there, but if you're not, we will remove property anyway." And just to put his mind at rest, I actually phoned up the bailiff and stated that they'd said they were going to come and remove property, to which they replied, "Yes, we can legally come and remove property because once we've had a walk-in possession order." Now, a walk-in possession order is when they've actually walked into your property and started jotting down what you've got. If you never let them in the first place, they can't get in. and the bailiff admitted that if we've not entered your property, we cannot get in. One of the tricks they will do is try pushing past you.
Right.
If they touch you, that's assault. Call the police.
What, just touching you?
Touching you is assault.
Okay.
So they can't push their way in, force past you, that's assault. If they do that, call the police there and then. And they will back off, and also threaten them with a Form 4 warning, which you can send off to their certificating court,
right.
And they basically could lose a job for that.
Right, I'm going to go. Fill with, please. Don't stop me. I'm not stopping you. Right. Show us the warrant. Give us the keys. Show us the warrant. Let me have a look. You don't have it. 999. See it? 999. 999. You're not going in without the warrant. You don't tell me what to do. I will understand. Yeah, well, you're wrong. I'm wrong, am I? What am I wrong about? Where's your warrant? Go away. There. You got. Can you see that? Let me have a look at the warrant. How you doing? There. You're trying to be heavy here or something. You're trying to intimidate me. You know what you're trying to do. You said 6 times, can't see the warrant. There. No. I want to see the warrant. Hand me the warrant. You're not you, are you?
And of course, they can't break into your house. That's the other thing. Everyone thinks, well, they can't. You can let them in. Once you've let them in, basically they can then go in again. But what you do not let them in. You make sure the house is locked at all times.
Except for exceptional circumstances listed here, criminal court fines, income tax, or, if it's a business, can reasonable force be used to gain entry, but only as a last resort and only after all other avenues have been exhausted. The wording here is reasonable force. Bailiffs cannot use force against a person, and it states it here in Schedule 12 of the Control of Goods Act. And here in the Criminal Law Act 1997. And on the gov.uk website. The problems arise when bailiffs do not understand their powers and misinterpret the words of the acts, which is easy to do as they are so complicated. Bailiffs tend to pick the parts of certain acts that suit them best. A prime example of this is when the police attend, and the bailiff shows them a court warrant, walking possession order, or something of that nature, and then they show this part of Schedule 12 of the Taking Control of Goods Act, where it states that they're there to prevent a breach of the peace, and if you obstruct the bailiff, they will arrest you to prevent that breach of the peace. This can be broken down to a tale of the tape to show the position of each person in the situation. You, a living, breathing human being. Human rights are absolute. Only unto the law. You are man or woman, the highest authority. You are trying to protect your property. The bailiff works for a corporation, has a fictional title and is representing a fiction. No rights to use force against a human. Has some sort of court order. The police officer is a public servant. You are the public and the bailiff is not. They're there to prevent a breach of the peace. Many encounters have ended with the police siding with the bailiffs, and acts of violence or arrests being made on the debtor, all because of a major misunderstanding on behalf of the police. Here's why. We have shown that force cannot be used to collect a debt except in exceptional circumstances. A bailiff cannot use force on a person. If you are standing in front of your door and peacefully resisting, they cannot move you out of the way. For an arrest under the prevention of a breach of the peace, there are plenty of case laws that show the aggressor is the one to be arrested. The main definition comes from R.V. Howe, 1981, and the following next 4 case laws define who is to be arrested to prevent a breach of the peace. You cannot be obstructing a bailiff from his duties, as using force on a human is not his duty. It seems trivial, but the law allows you to peacefully resist the possession of your home or property. If the bailiff is there for a debt or a non-criminal fine, such as a speeding ticket or parking ticket, then it is a civil matter and the police must be impartial no matter what the paperwork says. R. V. Howe, 1981, and Bibby v. Chief Constable of Essex Police, 2004, are now held as the authority. The main one to remember is a threat must come from the person to be arrested. That means if a bailiff tries to touch you or move you out of the way, they are the one to be arrested.
To you. I'll have you up in court, mate. Oh, please do. Oh, I will do. What's your name? Higgs. Higgs. First name, Paul. Date of birth, 5/9/55. I'm being intimidated and threatened. Your car is worth less than something on my trial. What's the matter with you? How many of you are there? Hello?
You're committing trespass and fraud and theft on people. That's what you do for a job, and you should be disgusted with yourself. That's what you do for a job. You're a thief.
Go away, you ain't having it. Too many fucking massacres today and more coming down. The money how many fucking
These would be a please.
Constable.
And can you please explain that the evidence is not admissible if it's not signed? This is not signed, nothing's signed, it's inable, and will be trespassing.
You can't force your way into the property, what are you doing? You're breaking the law. You're breaking the law, we're filming you. Who are you? Who wants ID, please?
Some ID.
No problem. Why are you trying to force in here?
That's a warrant of control for the unpaid penalty.
And where's the magistrate's signature?
Don't need a magistrate.
Oh, yes you do!
So you can call the police if you wish.
You both have no power here, so you should leave. Because we will ring the police. You can do that, but it will be deemed theft.
Well, leave the land. He's got no authority. He's a locksmith. Get him off.
You need to read this in relation to this eviction today. You're not allowed to use any force or violence, and that would be laid at magistrate's court tomorrow for a summons against anybody here who authorises or who issues violence for this eviction. It's simply not allowed. I'm pretty sure of that. I'm pretty sure it's not just a job. Yeah, but vocationally you're doing the right thing. Yeah, you swore an oath to protect us people, not to protect them, to protect us.
This is going to happen wherever you guys go from now on. You people need to really think about what you're doing, please, before it's too late. And don't be arrogant, Mr. Koresh. You really have got a problem there.
Don't touch me now, mate. Don't touch it. Not touching it. Don't touch it. I'm not touching it. You're not coming in. You're not coming in. You're not coming in. Right.
See you.
Good night. For law, it's a criminal. It's a trespass. Court finding is refusing to request a name by a sergeant. Thank you very much, Constable. Absolutely, you're going to be heroes online. Absolute heroes. Well done. Absolutely amazing work. You've just made history in this country. You've just made history in this country.
Fuck yeah, that's fucking sick. I fucking love it. Absolutely fucking bring me to tears when I see it. Oh, fuck yeah. Watch this video, guys. Hit the link and watch it on the fucking screen. So, tell me.
In this society, there is no way of actually living free at this point. I've had the idea to find some land somewhere, buy a piece of land and build my own house and live apart from the system. The system will not allow you to do that. They will come for you and kick you off your own land and force you to live the way they want you to live.
What I feel is quite important is people need to get educated. People need to start waking up and realise what's going on around them. Generally, people tend to only give a damn really what's happening when it's actually on their doorstep and it's happening to them. But unfortunately, we can't wait for that to happen. We need to realise that we're all one and the same.
You're absolutely
we
correct.
all need to look out for each other and protect each other, because we've got a system now that's been built up around us. We've got a corporate web of an empire that's completely taken over every aspect of our lives.
So, to people who are worried about debt, again, don't worry about it. You got family, you got kids, you got real problems in life. Worry about those, and the debt is not something to worry about. Fair enough, some people have mortgages, but again, as I said earlier, you start dancing with the devil, you're going to get burnt. You play with fire, you're going to get burned. You're going to sign agreements that banks own your house, you're going to get burnt. You don't pay that. But in terms of consumer debt, personal loans, unsecured debt, fuck it. Yeah, you won't be able to get a mortgage for 6 years. And who's got enough money to save up to buy it for a deposit for a mortgage? Anyway, I don't know. So just don't worry. Live in love.
Get Out of Debt Free we've got one piece of the jigsaw, but there's so many things that need fixing on the planet, like health, education, law, everything. There's so many pieces, and I've been at, I think, 8 different festivals this summer, and I've seen tens upon tens of, probably 50 different speakers, and all of them have got a little bit of the jigsaw, and I'm sort of just trying to see how together that we can build a new sort of reality based on fairness, because when you realise that, hang on, they're spraying stuff in the skies, they're putting stuff in our water supply, and they're cutting down rainforests, and these are all problems. Now, I've got the answer to one of these, but to change the world, we've got to sort out all these problems, I feel.
The people stand above the government stand above citizens. And in America, we've taken the term citizen from them, but citizenship was actually created with the abolition of the slave trade. And it was so that slaves could be given the same rights as the free people, but without the same power. So the citizens were always going to be ascribed their rights and responsibilities by the government. And it was so that they could keep a finger on the ex-slaves. Whereas that's now been applied to everybody everywhere, and now obviously you have good citizenship classes at school, and citizenship is on the curriculum now. So all this is being not brought in for us, it's been brought in for a couple of generations' time, when it's totally normalised that everyone is a citizen who only has rights and responsibilities because the government gave them to them, and the standing as the people will be long forgotten by them.
The sadness of this is that there are a lot of people out there that are involved in the commercial construct and are doing things every single day for one reason, that basically to survive. So they have to go to work every single day and know that what they're doing is not moral. But they have to do it because they feel that there is no other way they can support their families. They are taxed to the hill. Everything that they've got, they are threatened with its removal if they do not comply. That's a very, very sad situation, because that means that the human being is being controlled by a construct and can't escape that construct. And it gets worse day in, day out. They want a way out.
Ignorance is our fault. Not being up to speed with what's going on is our responsibility. We're giving our power away to people who are using it against us. People need to understand. People need to wake up to what's really, really going on before it's too late. And stop looking at the mainstream media. Stop looking at the mainstream newspapers. Start looking at some information that's real and is relevant, because otherwise we're all going to be microchipped. We're all going to be controlled. We can barely do anything now, having to ask the government for permission to protest against the government. Our freedoms are being taken away by the day, and people are not noticing because they're being distracted with other things, from religions, from TVs, from celebrity gossip. We need to be adults about it. We need to open our eyes, and we need to really, really see what's happening. Otherwise, we're going to be in the middle of this new world order, this complete one system of control, and we're all just going to be barcodes. and that's the way it's going, and that is the true reality of the world that we're living in at the moment.
5 years ago, when I was looking for letters to actually send to the banks, there was nothing on the internet. Nobody was talking about this apart from Mary Elizabeth Croft, who I based our letters on. And I thought, this is wonderful. And I was thinking there must be template letters out there for, after the book that she wrote. There was nothing. Now we've got websites and forums and loads of different letters out there for dealing with banks and debt collectors. So that's how far in the last 5 years consciousness has shifted. People are waking up. Now, when we hit the 100th monkey effect, that's when everyone wakes up. It's like a new film that's like no one's heard of, and then suddenly it breaks through and everyone's talking about it. And I feel that people suddenly realise, my goodness, we've been had by the banks, the governments and the corporations, and with endless war, with endless poverty, and keeping us on that treadmill.
Hello, this is Michael Tellinger, and I need to take a few minutes to talk to you about the whole banking issue and promissory notes and bills of exchange and questions that arise around that area of information. Because of my extended struggle with the banks in the Supreme Court of Johannesburg, I have come to learn a great deal about this subject and found a lot of interesting information that you will only find when you actually have to stand against what I guess could be called the highest paid lawyers in the world that represents the banks and the banksters. One of the most important things that I've found, and the reason I'm doing this, by the way, is because I get
Stop. Sorry, guys.
promissory notes and so forth. So this is why I'm doing this video, so I can put it on record for once and everyone can look at this and learn from this and be informed as you can be from what I'm going to share with you, because I'm going to try and share as much as I can with you and show you examples of the promissory notes and how to work, how to deliver them. So firstly, understand that what banks do is completely and utterly criminal. Okay, if you still think that banks are respectable, honourable corporations and companies, then you're still mistaken. Everything that banks do in today's world is basically a criminal activity, and the global banking industry is the largest organised crime syndicate in the world. They're the ones that they force through our governments, whom they control, creating the laws that are imposed on society, that control the judiciary, that are upheld by the judges. And often the judges are just very ignorant about what it is that they're actually upholding. So sometimes one can't even blame them. But sometimes, like in my case, it becomes very evident that the judges are paid off by the banks, especially in the case that we had against Standard Bank in South Africa, which became a very high-profile case and connected to the Ubuntu Liberation Movement and the Ubuntu political party, and it started getting a lot of heat. So sooner or later, the judge was paid off to pass or hand down a fraudulent judgment. The only way that I could protect myself is to learn from that experience. So in other words, I lost the property that I was in court for, and it was auctioned. And then what happens is once you get a judgment against you, because remember that you can't really win. We can't really win against the banks in the court of law. Because, as I mentioned, the court and the law is set up to uphold the rights and protect the interests of the banks and the banksters. So you can't win. Although there have been a few minor wins in various courts around the world, the major wins will not come until I don't know when. But the reason for that is that if we had a major win against a bank based on the arguments that we pose in the court, that I posed myself, the fact that the bank doesn't have the original contract, and without the original contract there can be no hearing and no court case, a simple fact that should really precede any court procedure from because they sold the contract to a third party, and therefore they can't come after you for money that you supposedly owe them, money that they never lent you, because they create the money out of thin air. But to cut a long story short, one of the very important things that I learned was that banks accept payments in the form of bills of exchange and promissory notes. Now, this didn't come from me. It was information that was spontaneously volunteered by Advocate Shem Simon, who represented Standard Bank. This is in my second or third hearing in the Supreme Court of Johannesburg. And he just suddenly blurted out, to our surprise, for some reason that still baffles me, that Standard Bank, which means all banks, accept payment in forms of bills of exchange and promissory notes. And I suddenly went, oh my goodness, this is very important information. Because if I had known this, I would have been able to do something about it long before I got myself into the court and had to stand there, defend myself against the fraudulent and criminal arguments of the banks. So, what I then went and did is I spent quite a lot of time with our legal advisor, Raymond Dix, and we looked at the Bills of Exchange Act, the lawful act that guides the financial industry and how money works and how money is created, and guides the entire financial sector of our country, of Britain, of the United States, and so forth. Every country has got their own equivalent of the Bills of Exchange Act. In South Africa, the Bills of Exchange Act comes from the British Bills of Exchange Act, which I believe is from 1822 or 1882, I think it was. And ours is just a slight bastardization of that British Bills of Exchange Act, slanted towards the needs of the people of South Africa, or the needs of the banks that govern and control the people in South Africa. So, we created what we now use as a standard promissory note. And here's a basic example of it. We created a very nice, fancy-looking promissory note. Remember that all the bills in your wallet are actually, let's say, £100 or $100. It's a bill. It's a $100 bill, right? So just like, and it's a promissory note. It's supposed to be a promise to pay. To pay what? To pay $100 on demand, or it's become a very grey area, actually. So what we're really, in essence, doing is we're not trying to find a way to wangle ourselves out of debt or whatever. We're using the laws and the system that was created, the corrupt and fraudulent system created by the banking fraternity and the banking cartel, to exploit and abuse and enslave humanity. We're using those same laws in our own favor, and somehow it seems to have worked. In my case, and the reason I'm sharing this with you, because I have now paid Standard Bank close to or just over 800,000 Rand with 4 different promissory notes from about June 2013 until the 12th of December, or was it 12th of October, 12th of October 2014. So over a 1.5 year period, I've paid the bank close to 800,000 Rand in promissory notes that I created. And this is, as I showed you, this is the basic standard promissory note. Now, what's important about it is the information that's written on there. To make it look really fancy, this promissory note is available on the Ubuntu Party website. You can download it and use it for yourself. There's a blank version of this available with text boxes, so you can just click on the text box and fill in your own details and your own information. What you're going to have to for your respective countries is this little thing here that says, those two lines at the top that say, tender in terms of the Bills of Exchange Act 34 of 1964 as amended up to Bills of Exchange Amendment Act 56 of 2000, and also in terms of the settlement in terms of the High Court Rule 45.8a. This is in the South African High Court rules. Now, the United States, England, Australia, every country will have their own High Court rules. Now, the High Court rules are the very strict rules that basically control the conduct in the High Court, the way papers must be served, the way they must be filled in, the way the headings must be done, and all this stuff. Now, as a layperson, we don't know the High Court rules, and I had to teach myself all these High Court rules when I represented myself with the aid of a lot of very amazing people. The outcome is that we now know, I've learned all this stuff at great expense, as you now know, and 4 years of blood, sweat and tears and a lot of stress preparing myself for facing these banksters and criminals in the court of South Africa, of Johannesburg. There's some very basic information on this promissory note. Firstly, it's called a promissory note. Then there's a space that you need to create your own code, the promissory note number, like the number on your bill, on any dollar bill or pound, you'll see there's a number. Okay? Well, you make up the number because this is your note. So make up any number that's relevant to you, right? And then you write that number in there. Now, then what you do is you create a little index like this one here. As you can see, there are 4 entries on this index, and these are the 4 promissory notes that I've paid. So every promissory note that I pay, I write on this index, along with the index number. So I write the date, I write the name of the recipient, and all 4 recipients here are Standard Bank of South Africa, Standard Bank of South Africa, right? And then the note number, and that note number is that number over there, so that you have a record of what you've paid out and what notes you've created, because now you're creating value. Remember, banks work with negotiable instruments. Negotiable instruments get their value from our signatures. The moment that I create this, every bill, every invoice, every statement that you sign in the bank, the moment you put your signature on that, you have turned that piece of paper into a negotiable instrument, because your signature creates the liquidity and the value in that piece of paper. So it turns it into a liquid negotiable instrument. And so this is what we're creating here. This promissory note becomes a liquid negotiable instrument with which the bank can trade. And that therein lies the interesting trick that we've encoded in this promissory note, which I'll explain to you now. So there's your promissory note index with all the promissory notes, the number, and then the amount that you made the promissory note for, and then just my own notes that it was the Standard Bank, and then the case number, and so forth. This last one that I paid is for the auction shortfall. So in other words, when they auctioned my house, the shortfall on the price of the property was about 500,000 rand, right? 500,000 rand. And then the bank still comes after you to make you pay that shortfall for the property that they auctioned. I mean, that's how criminal this thing is. It is insane. It's pure insanity. And only we can get ourselves out of this. So there's your index. Now, let me show you the promissory notes. So that's what it looks like, printed out on a normal piece of 80-gram bond white paper in a color printer. Very fancy-looking promissory note. And then it says here, the promissory note was issued at Watervalboven in Mpumalanga, date 20 November 2014, amount 367,202 rand and 67 cents. And then you write it out like you would on a normal check, and then it says, this certifies that Michael Julius Tellinger, my ID number, hereby promise to pay Standard Bank of South Africa, and then in brackets, the holder, the full amount specified on the note for value received. It's critical that it says that, for value received, so that there is an exchange of some sort that's supposed to take place here. That's also a protection method for yourself. So you can say, if you haven't received any value for this note, then there can be no exchange going on. So, and then it carries on here, terms and conditions, and this is critical. That's the little terms and conditions, and then date and signature. The date that you create this note, and the signature, your signature, in blue ink. This is critical. I'm going to come back to the blue ink again. Now, the terms and conditions here, I'm going to read out to you, but you can see it on the promissory note printout on the Word document that you can download of this. And it says the following. You're going to, once again, have to change this. Just click on the text box and change this, that certain areas that might not apply to you, but it should be generic. And this is what it says. The payment will be made in monthly installments of 500 Rand per month on the 7th day of every consecutive month until the obligation has been fulfilled. Until the obligation has been fulfilled. The obligation stated herein. Okay, we're not saying that we're going to repay or pay the full amount. We use very specific words. Until the obligation has been fulfilled. Because ultimately, no money has ever been loaned. This whole thing was created out of thin air. You were conned and suckered into signing a contract that basically turned you into a debt slave for the rest of your life on home mortgages, most of us, right? Until the obligation has been fulfilled. This, and then it gets even more important. The payment can be obtained by the holder of this note, which is the bank now, because I've given it to the bank. And it's the holder, or if the bank hands the note to someone else, that someone else becomes the holder in due course. These are all legal terms that you learn as you go through this process. So the payment can be obtained by the holder at 17 Zazim Road, Watervalboven in Mpumalanga. That's this address. So you're making them come to you to fetch the money. There's no obligation that you have to go to them to pay them. You make them come to you to fetch the money. Okay, that's your right. And then it says, I hereby give permission to the holder, the bank who holds this, or if they've sold this note to someone else, which they most likely will, because with your signature on there, you've given them a liquid negotiable instrument. All they have to do is sell it on into the markets, the stock exchange markets and the bond markets in the world. That's what you've done, right? And that's what they trade with bills of exchange, negotiable instruments. You see how this thing gets really wicked, what they've created here. So, I hereby give permission to the holder and or the holder in due course of this promissory note to use this note in any way necessary as a negotiable instrument to be financially traded on, means they can trade with this note, this negotiable instrument that you've given them, to be financially traded on, whereas such trade shall terminate the obligation herein. So basically I'm saying that if they sell this note to a third party,
fuck off,
this amount, because they no longer are the owner of this note and they can no longer come after me. So, what have we done? We've given them an option to come and get this money from me on the 7th of the month after they receive this promissory note from me. If they haven't raised an objection within 7 days, that means they've accepted the note. Even if they raise an objection, they need to raise an objection to say, we don't accept your payment, in which case you tell them, well, this payment is the final settlement and it's delivered, which according to the bills of exchange means that the deal is concluded. Okay, and they need to raise an objection in the court and take you to court to say to the judge that they don't accept your form of payment. They can't just say, we don't accept your payment. They need to start legal procedure against you to say, we don't accept your payment, because this payment is legally sound according to the Bills of Exchange Act. You're exercising your right to use promissory note and bills of exchange to pay the bank. This is also very important. Please do not use these kinds of bills of exchange, or promissory notes rather. Do not use these promissory notes to pay other people, or to pay shops, or to pay other businesses, because that's not the intention here. They're just normal people like you, caught up in the same trap and the con by the banking fraternity. So only use this, and I have to stress this very, very loudly, only use promissory notes with banks and government institutions, because they're ultimately the instruments of the banks. Okay, if you use it with other people, you're going to get yourself into a lot of trouble. Don't do that. So, if the bank does not come and get this, the money, the 500 Rand every month, after the 7th of the month, because it stipulates here that they must come and get the money from you on the 7th of the month, of every consecutive month. If they don't fetch it on the 7th of the first month after you've delivered this note to them, you've assumed, and I've assumed, that they have sold the note, and therefore they're no longer obligated to get the money. That means I have no longer any obligation to pay any money to them. Therewith, my obligation has ended. And this, I believe, intelligently structured promissory note based on has now turned into a liquid negotiable instrument, and you've settled the amount outstanding to the bank. So, just to show you how I do it. First of all, I printed out a whole bunch of promissory notes that I printed out on a half a page like this. The reason I do this is because when I fill this in and I sign it, I write underneath in blue ink. First of all, you sign the promissory note over there, you print it out on a printer, so it's nice and neat at the top there, and then you sign it with blue ink, and underneath you write here, like you'll see here. This is the copy. This is actually a color photostat of one of the first promissory notes that I paid, and you'll see that I sign here in blue ink underneath. It says here, it says copy there, so it can't be used. The original note has been signed in blue ink. So you know there's only one original note. There can't be several copies of it. There can only ever be one note. And the reason, imagine it's like if you take £100 note or $100 bill from your wallet, there's only one bill. You can't go photocopy it and make copies of it and use that. That's called fraud, right? And so this is, again, there's only one original bill of this, so no one can copy it and benefit from selling copies of this. So that's why you write there. You sign it in blue ink and say the original note has been signed in blue ink. And then you see the space underneath here is critical. I take it to the police station and I sign this in front of the cops so they authenticate that it is my signature on this and put the police stamp on there, the police commissioner of oaths, and the police stamp. So now I've actually validated that this is a real legal document signed by me and turned into a negotiable instrument. Then the important critical delivery comes into play. This is very important. Now you take this promissory note, you make a copy of it, like this one here. There's a copy of it, or one of the copies. It's not exactly the same one, but and then you can see. Let's not use the color one because it might be confusing. So, well, let's use the color one because that shows you. So you have an original that you're going to hand to the bank, and you have your photocopy, which is your proof of delivery. And you write a little letter that goes along with it that says, you address it to the lawyers. Now, you have to deliver this to either the bank's postal and legal document delivery. Don't go to the bank and hand it to the cashier. Okay, you don't deliver promissory notes in that way. That's just not going to work. You have to go to the bank head office and go to the post delivery or the legal document delivery office and deliver this to the person that receives legal documents or the post. They will stamp, they have a stamp that they will stamp proof of delivery for you. Right, and this is critical so that you've got these documents stamped which prove that you've delivered it and they've accepted your notes in their office and their building. So there you can see. This is the letter. This was to Norton Rose, South Africa, the lawyers that represent Standard Bank, 12th of February 2014, and this was one of the promissory notes, and it says, find and close payment and final settlement to your client, Standard Bank, South Africa, regarding bill of costs. Okay, and bill of cost case number, and I put the case number, sincerely, Michael Tellinger, and then you take this with the original promissory note and your copy of the promissory note, and you deliver these three to the bank, postal receiving or the lawyer's legal document delivery office, and you make them stamp all these with proof of delivery. Then you put the attachment, the attached note that you wrote together with the promissory note, you put it in an envelope, you seal it, and you give it back to the guy that sits behind the desk, and you sign it. I normally sign it to the chief financial officer, because the chief financial officer will probably have a better idea what to do with this promissory note. And that's how I personally delivered all these promissory notes, bills of exchange, same thing, promissory notes. And just to show you the ones that I delivered, this is for 75,000 Rand on the 9th of June 2013. There you can see the police stamp and the date, and there you can see the receiving stamp, proof of delivery from the lawyer's office for Standard Bank. Okay, 75,000 Rand, 9th of June 2013. This is 82,000 Rand, 82,000 Rand, also on the same day, 9th of June 2013, all stamped. This was the letter that accompanied it, as I stated already, also stamped, proof of delivery, and then this was the third one that I delivered to them. This is a color copy of it, for 279,000 Rand. 279,000. That's a lot of money, people. That's like 4-5 times as much as the average South African earns per annum. Okay, and paid and delivered. And then the final promissory note that I delivered, as I showed earlier, on the 20th of November 2014, which is for the shortfall on the auction of my house, and that was for, this is a large one which I didn't deliver, but I can still sign it at any stage, 367,000 Rand for the shortfall on the auction of my house. So all in all, there are 4 promissory notes, as you can see on the promissory note index, and the total there is close to 800,000 Rand. In South Africa, that is an exorbitant amount of money. All these promissory notes have never been contested by the bank or by their lawyers, and as far as I'm concerned, the deal is closed. Any objection right now will have to become a new case, a new action in the court, to present to the judge why they did not accept or do not accept these promissory notes. Unfortunately, more than a year and a half has gone by, and they have not raised any objections. So what has happened now is they have now set a precedent. So you can use my case wherever you are in the world, specifically in South Africa. You can use my case and what you see in this video as the precedent of delivering payment to banks and their lawyers and government organizations by means of a personal promissory note that you create in your home to whatever value or money amount you want to make it for. It can be $1 trillion, it can be $5, it doesn't matter. You make the money out of thin air. You create the value in that promissory note out of thin air, just like banks create money out of thin air. So I hope this has cast some light and knowledge on this so that you don't have any confusion about this. Make sure that you follow this step by step and don't use promissory notes to pay people or businesses or companies just like you, trapped and enslaved in the system. Go out there and be intelligent about this, and only use it if you really need to, and understand that it's your right, and you're now using the legal system and the laws and the bills of exchange in your own favor. Until now, they've been used against us to enslave us and the rest of humanity on this planet. Till next time, have a good day.
Hello, my name is Greg Braden. If you are watching this presentation today, what I know is that you know this is certainly no ordinary time in the history of our world, in the history of our nation, of any nation, in the history of the people of the world. And I want you to know it's not your imagination. We are living an extraordinary time of change in the world around us. And what that means is that our lives are changing in ways that we simply have never seen before. And that's what I want to talk to you about today. How can we embrace this change in a healthy way? How can we find the resilience in our personal lives, in our families, in our communities, to thrive in a healthy way in what now the experts are calling the time of extremes. So I'd like to begin with an amazing statement by a man I have tremendous respect for. His name is E.O. Wilson. He's an evolutionary biologist, and what he says about our time in history begins by saying that we are drowning in information while starving for wisdom. And that is such a powerful statement. And as I read this, I knew that he could have stopped right there, and it would have been just a beautiful and very accurate thing to say, but he didn't. He went on and elaborated on what he meant by this. And I'd like to share this as we begin our program today, because what E.O. Wilson said in this statement about our time and our world, it applies to you and me and this presentation today. He said, we are drowning in information. We're starving for wisdom. The world has changed. He said the world from this point forward is going to be run by people that he calls synthesizers. I love this. Synthesizers. A synthesizer is someone who can put together just the right information at just the right time and then think critically about what they have done and make important choices wisely. And that is precisely where you and I find ourselves in our world today, and that's what this program is all about. It's no longer enough to be an expert in only one topic or one field, because we don't live our lives in a vacuum. Beautiful example. I was trying to share with my mother how to access her emails on the computer, thinking it would be a simple thing to do, but we couldn't just get her on to the emails. She had to figure out how to turn on the computer, how to hook up the computer, how to get onto the internet, how to choose the right browser, all of these things. And it's just a simple example of what is now a common fact. And that is that we must know a little bit about a lot of things and be able to weave these things together to solve the problems in our lives and to embrace change in a healthy way. So this program certainly reflects this. It's not only about the healing in our everyday lives. I'd like to talk about the context of our lives within which the need for the healing is occurring. Something is changing in our world. And my sense, my feeling, is that when the facts are clear, the choices become obvious. When the facts are clear, the choices become obvious. And ultimately, the better we know ourselves, the better equipped we are to deal with whatever life brings to our doorstep. So that will be the theme for everything I'm going to share in the next hour. So I want to begin just by acknowledging a couple of facts about our lives and where we are today. It is a fact that we are living a time of extremes. The experts are calling this a time of extremes, and it doesn't mean that only bad things are happening in the world, or even good things for that matter. What they're telling us is that big things are happening, big changes in the world, and that means big changes in our lives. And I think we're all sensing now that our world is changing, and it's changing in ways that we have never seen. No one in this generation has witnessed the convergence of cyclic changes that we are living today, whether we're talking about climate or economy or conflict. Our world is changing in ways that we've never seen. And what that means is our lives are changing quickly in ways that we're not used to. And I want to be very clear when I say this. I'm not saying that this is good or bad or right or wrong. I'm not saying the change is the result of mistakes made in the past. I think we've all done the best we could with what we knew when we had to make our choices. And now the world is changing, and new discoveries are giving us the reason to think differently about ourselves and our relationship to one another and our bodies and the healing that is required for us to embrace this change in a healthy way. So it is a fact now that we've got to think differently and we've got to live differently, perhaps more so than at any time in the past, so that we can be resilient. And we're not just talking about trying to find a way to survive. We'd like to thrive. How do we thrive in the presence of the changes? And how does that thriving reflect as the healing in our bodies in conventional and non-conventional ways, subconscious, conscious, emotional, and physical? This is all part of the healing that we're talking about here. So the world right now, we're living a time of extremes. We're talking about peak oil or peak death. We're talking about climate change or social change. What we now know is that the changes in the world, we can no longer separate them from the changes in our everyday lives. Maybe we thought we could at some point in the past. But it's pretty much impossible to do these things now. The events unfolding halfway around the world in the economy and climate, they're affecting what happens in our own living room, the price we pay for food at the grocery stores, we put it on the dinner table. They're affecting our jobs, industry, careers, and all of that is leading to a new normal. And this is important. For many people, there has been a sense that the world was kind of chugging along in a way that allowed it to work pretty well. There were some things that could work better. And then something happened. And for some people, that something was 9/11, or maybe it was the economic collapse of 08. Whatever it is, there was a sense that something happened. And the reason I'm saying this is because so many people throughout the world, in the last 5 years, I've been on every continent of the earth except Antarctica. There's a sense that people are waiting for things to get back to normal, back to the way things used to be. They're waiting for the climate to go back to the regular seasons of rain and snow and temperature that they knew when they were kids. They're waiting for the economy to go back to the kind of interest rates where they could prepare for sending their kids to school or their retirement in the way that was 15, 20, 30 years ago. They're waiting for the old normal to return. And the reason I'm saying this to you is because we are now living a new normal. The old normal cannot return because the world that supported that normal no longer exists. That world is gone. The world changed. No one really told us. It wasn't really acknowledged in the mainstream media. And this has direct applications to our healing and our health because big change in the world has to mean big change in our lives. We cannot separate those two things. Big change in the world means stress in our lives. And I'm not saying that the stress necessarily in and of itself is right, wrong, good, or bad. But it's very specific kinds of stress we're dealing with. So I'm just going to ask a question that I am often asked when I'm at a live event. People ask me all the time. They say, why do we typically die between the age of 70 and 100 years of age? And at first it might seem like a silly question to some people because they'll say, well, old age, or, they'll say, that's just the way it is. But the new science, the best science of our time, is now telling us that our bodies have this extraordinary ability to heal, even in ways that we have been conditioned to believe they could not, in ways that we were taught they could not in our lifetimes, in the medical schools, in the classrooms, in the textbooks, in the mainstream documentaries. Every organ in our body now has been documented with the ability to heal itself. Every cell, every kind of cell in our body is now documented with the ability to heal itself, even those we were told could not. Pancreatic cells, brain cells, heart cells, spinal cord tissue. All of these things are now documented with the ability to heal themselves, but the key is that they must be given the right environment. They must be given the right conditions to do this. So, with these discoveries in mind, now that it is a fact that our body has the ability to heal itself and also reverse aging, and we'll talk about that in just a few moments, now this question actually takes on even greater meaning. If we have this ability, why do we typically die between 70 and 100 years? Why is that the typical lifespan of an adult in the Western world? And the answer is very powerful. The leading cause of deaths in adults over 65 in the Western world, we know, is heart disease, what we call heart disease. When I first began to understand this, my question was, what does that mean? When you say heart disease, it sounds like a catch-all for a lot of things that either aren't understood or are understood and maybe too complex to put into the answer. What is heart disease? This is when I went to the open literature, the amazing work of James Blumenthal, and I have so much respect for this man from Duke University. He is a pioneer in making the kinds of relationships between mind and body that we're going to be talking about here. What James Blumenthal said was that heart disease, it's defined physically as things we all are familiar with: high blood pressure, vascular plaque, stroke. We all know about those things. But then he went a step further, and he linked these physical conditions to non-physical experiences. He said that the heart disease results from long-term experiences of fear, frustration, anxiety, disappointment, a long term. So what he's saying to us is that it's stress. It is the stress from fear, the stress of the frustration or the anxiety or disappointment. And I want to be really clear. I don't want to leave you with the feeling that stress has to be a bad thing. There are positive, good kinds of stress. There are negative, bad kinds of stress. There's constructive stress. There's destructive stress. The key here is where he says long term. So what Blumenthal is talking about when he talks about the stress, it's not the stress that's the problem. It's unresolved stress. If we allow the stress to continue in our minds and our bodies, hour after hour, day after day, week after week, month after month, that's where the problem comes in. And the new science now is telling us precisely why this is. So the unresolved stress from anything is what is leading to the disease that steals from us the very thing that we cherish the most, and that is life itself. So this 70 to 100 years, that appears to be how long this magnificent organ, our hearts, can hold up under the pressure of unresolved stress. If we don't know how to deal with the experiences of change, the 70 to 100 years is like stretching a rubber band. This is how long the rubber band can be stretched until it simply gives out. Something has to give. Now, I find this absolutely fascinating, and this would be interesting at any time, but now we've opened within a larger context. The world is changing. It's changing in ways that we've never seen, in ways that we're not used to. And those changes, if we do not have the tools to embrace the change in a healthy way, if we do not understand why the change is happening, if we don't understand where we fit into the change and see light at the end of the tunnel and know how to make life better for ourselves, that's stress. And that is what's killing people that we love, our friends, our families. That is what's stealing from us the very thing that we cherish the most. So, resilience. Resilience is the key when we're dealing with any kind of change. And I know that resilience, the word itself, means different things to different people. Textbook discussions of resilience typically describe the ability to bounce back or to spring back to a normal functioning after a time of distress. So a family loses a loved one in a battlefield in Afghanistan, halfway around the world. Parents lose their son or their daughter. Brothers and sisters lose their siblings. Husbands and wives lose husbands and wives. And they must find the resilience to move on with life after that loss, after that trauma. So that's one form of resilience. We've all experienced it. I think it's a good definition. When I began studying the principles of resilience, I wanted to know if there was more. Is there more than the ability to bounce or spring back? And the Stockholm Resilience Institute is actually studying what is now being called expanded resilience. And it's the kind of resilience where we think and live each day in a way that allows us to embrace the obvious change that is upon us so that we don't have to spring back or bounce back. We've already accounted for that change in our lives. And that's the kind of resilience that I'm talking about here. The Institute of Heart Math is a pioneering research center in Northern California. I'm not their employee. I want to be very clear about that. But I know them very well, and I've worked with them for over 20 years. I've worked with the people at HeartMath. They are a pioneering research organization made of medical doctors, scientists, engineers, chemists, physicists, computer scientists that have left their respective professions to come together and pool their talent to explore the power of the human heart in unconventional ways. So we all know that the heart can pump blood, but you can build a machine to do that. The question is, what else? What else does our heart do? That's what the Institute of Heart Math is all about. So they're sharing some of their information with me, and I'm sharing some of it with you here today. And what you're seeing right now is a study of resilience that they performed. And it applies to all of us in our lives in one form or another. It was a 60-day study. And what they're showing is that when we are presented with a new experience in life, we have to rise the occasion and figure out something new and how to perform differently, that we typically go through a series of stages. And you can see the stages in front of you. Usually the first 10 days, whatever this new experience is, we're usually up for it. You know, we're out there, we're embracing it, we're researching it, we've got the energy to deal with a new change. As I'm saying this to you now, I'll just share a personal experience that applies to this because it's very present with me right now. My mother is, her health is declining very quickly, and I am now her primary caregiver. power of attorney. I'm responsible for her life, her finances, for all of her medical, all of those things. And the reason I'm saying this is because when it began, I wasn't expecting it. I didn't see it coming. And I hear people say that a lot when they get to be, in middle age. Somehow I thought Mom and I would have more time together. So when her condition became apparent to me, I'm a scientist, I'm a researcher, I'm a scholar. So these first 10 days, that's exactly what I was doing. I was up for the challenge. I was on the internet, I was researching, looking for solutions, looking for options of how we were going to deal with this. So I identify with this very, very well. First 10 days. After about those 10 days to a little over a week, week and a half, something like that, there's a plateau that usually lasts for the next 30 days. So from 10 to 30 days, with the next 20 days, where we reach what's called a maximum efficiency. So we're just kind of hanging in there, and that's what I was doing. I was studying, and I was getting familiar with the language and the lingo and the diagnostics and the possibilities and all the things that can happen. Then typically people begin going into what's called a hyper-reactive stage. And hyper-reaction means we begin to function less optimally, begin to break down. We're tired, and that eventually goes into what's called emotional exhaustion at the end of that 60-day cycle. Okay, I identify with this curve, and what you're seeing on the screen, the red line is a typical curve for most of us. We work along those lines. The first 10 days, I identified with that very closely. The plateau, I identified very closely. When I felt myself moving into this hyper-reactive stage, I began applying techniques I'm going to talk about here today so that I would not go into the emotional exhaustion as people typically do when they don't have the techniques. So what we're talking about is a curve of resilience. The red line shows a curve. Now I'm going to show you a blue line. It is another curve of resilience that is elevated, and that's my goal here today. Through the information that I'm sharing, is that we learn the tools and the techniques to elevate our curve of resilience. We're not going to change what's happening in the world. We can definitely change how we respond to what's happening in the world. And this is how we learn to embrace that change in a healthy way. So with my mom, I began applying these techniques, and it's been 5 years now. And I feel like I'm dealing with the change as well. I'm respecting her wishes and doing all that I can to support her in the process that she's going through. And these tools have helped me invaluably. So that's one of the reasons I can speak about it very confidently, because I've experienced them personally. So I can look you right in the eye and say, I know this stuff works. So I want to just take about a half a step back. I've said the world is going through a lot of big changes right now, and that, for some people that can be frightening. So I wanted to share some good news. I even put the good news on the screen. It says good news. Part of the good news is that we already have all the solutions to the big problems in the world today, the technological solutions. And that comes as a surprise to a lot of people. They say, when's somebody going to figure out how to create, the energy that we need, or how to grow the food we need, or, how to fix the economy or whatever. The good news is we already have those answers. We already know how to deal with all of the problems. We know how to grow the food, and we have enough food to feed every mouth of every child, every man, every woman on the face of the earth today. We already know how to create the energy to bring electricity into every home of every family that wants it in the world. Not every family wants it. And we know how to do it with zero greenhouse gases. We know how to do it affordably. We know how to do it sustainably. We know how to create the medical model in our lives that relies upon the body's ability and the body's wisdom to heal itself, and integrates that with the best science and the technology of today. We already have these things. So the question is, if we have them, people say to me all the time, where are those solutions today? And that is the issue. The issue is not the solutions, it's the thinking that makes these issues a priority, and the solutions are priority in our lives. The thinking that allows us to embrace these in our lives today. And the key is simply this. My strong feeling is that the better we know ourselves, the better we can embrace whatever life brings to our doorstep. Whatever life's extremes come our way, if we know ourselves, if we know who we are, we know our capabilities, we know how to access these inner abilities that our ancestors talked about and sometimes seem like fairy tales to us. If we know the science that allows us to embrace these things, how do we kick up our immune system to amazing levels? How do we trigger those anti-aging hormones in our body and live to advanced ages? How do we trigger the 1,300 biochemical reactions that are all related in our body to give us optimum health and healing no matter what's happening in our lives? The better we know ourselves, the better we can embrace those changes. So for me, as a scientist, there's one question that I feel holds the key to all of these things. So I'm going to go a little detour briefly to what some people feel maybe is an esoteric tangent, but for me, it is exactly the information that leads us to our greatest path of strength and our greatest ability. There's one question that holds the key to thinking differently. So if I said to you that the way you answer one question holds the key, it's the reason for every decision you've ever made in your life, would you want to know what that is? If I said that same question, the way you answer that question, it's the basis for every choice that you have ever made in your life. When you accepted a job, when you declined a job, when you said yes to a relationship, when you said no, when you said yes to a medical procedure, when you said no to a medical procedure. Would you want to know what that is? If I said, the way you answer a single question, it's at the heart of every challenge that has ever passed your life, that is past crossing your path right now, that will ever cross your path in the future. I said, the way you answer this one question holds the key. Would you want to know what that question is? And of course, I think we all say yes. We say, well, what is that question? And the answer is deceptively simple. So please do not be deceived by the simplicity of the answer you're going to see. The question holds the key to thinking differently. For every decision we've ever made, every choice we've ever made, every challenge that's ever crossed our paths and how we deal with it, the question is simply this. Every human who has ever walked the earth has had to answer this for themselves in one way or another, consciously or subconsciously. Question, who am I? Who am I? Who am I in this world? What does this really mean? And because there are many of us, the question becomes, who are we? Who are we in this world? Where do we fit? What is our relationship to the world around us? So this is where I want to go just for a moment, because it's going to lead us into the science, directly into the science that takes us to the discoveries that allow us to optimize this healing in our bodies. Who are we? It matters for a very important reason. And if you've never thought about this, I'm going to invite you to do so just for a moment. The way you answer the question, who am I, for yourself, the way you answer that, it forms a lens, a filter, if you will, through which you see yourself and through which you will see every other person in the world and everything that happens to you in life. It forms a filter through which you will perceive and interpret all of the things that happen to you, your friends, your husband, your wife, your siblings, your loved ones, the way you perceive what's happening in the news around you, the way you perceive the way your body functions, the way you say, who am I? The way you answer that question is going to form that lens. So all of a sudden, this question becomes really important. I don't know what could be more important. Who are we? What I can say to you right now is that we are not what we have been told, and we are much, much more than we've ever imagined. And it gives me tremendous joy to be able to share some of the reasons why this is true with you today. I mentioned that I'm a scientist. My degree's in geology and the earth sciences, and to get to that degree, I had to study a lot of other sciences: marine biology, marine geology, computer science, physics, chemistry, mathematics, ocean science. And all of those have actually worked together really well to help me think of the world maybe a little bit differently and to see the world a little bit differently. It's more than these compartmentalized boxes of physics, chemistry, geology, and biology. It's the integration of all of these sciences together into life, something that works for us. So I have spent much of my adult life exploring the most ancient, cherished wisdom traditions of those who have come before us, of our ancestors, because I wanted to see how they have dealt in their time with the problems they experienced. Many of their problems are very similar to ours today. Our ancestors had to deal with climate change, for example, big changes in their lives, and they didn't have a lot of the technology that we have today. How did they do it? How did they embrace that change? We know they were resilient because they lasted long enough for us to be here. So how did they do this? What did they know in their time? Maybe that we've forgotten in ours, and what did they know that maybe we have never known about us and our relationship to the world? My journey has taken me to some of the most isolated, magnificent, beautiful, pristine, and remote places remaining on the earth today. Because my sense has always been that the more intact information would be found in places least disturbed by the modern world. So for that reason, I've made it a point to go to places where a lot of people simply don't go and where the modern world simply hasn't caught up yet. And my journey has taken me, it has taken me in some of the most magnificent monasteries. The one you're seeing on the screen is in Tibet. It's almost 17,000 feet above sea level in the highlands of the Tibetan Plateau in central China, or central Tibet. It's taken me into some of the most primitive and ancient monasteries. The one you're seeing right now is in the mountains of Egypt on the Sinai Peninsula. This monastery has been here for 15 years, and it holds a library of records second only to the Vatican in terms of ancient and pre-Christian traditions, and many of them are regarding health and healing. This is fascinating to me. When the ancient sect that is called the Essenes, Essenes, when they first showed up in this part of the world, in Egypt, before the time of Jesus Christ, the Egyptians had a word for them that immediately caught my interest. The Egyptians did not call them the Essenes, they called them therapeutae. They called them therapeutae because these people knew about healing. They knew how to create what appeared at that time to be miraculous healings because they understood the relationship between one human body and another, between us and the earth. And they understood what the human body was attempting to do in the healing process. And that kind of information is preserved in the records, in the libraries, in monasteries like the one you're seeing on the screen right now. So I've made it a point to go to these places, to study the texts and the records themselves, because that is where the data is found from those who have come before us. You know, science is a relatively new way of thinking about the world. It's only about 300 years old. Science is good. I think we all agree that the best science of our time is incomplete. There are glaring inconsistencies and gaps in the scientific understanding of us and our relationship to the world. So my question was, science is 300 years old. People have been here a lot longer than 300 years. What did we know before science? So we have 5,000 years of human experience and indigenous wisdom and mystical traditions that have been preserved in places like I'm sharing with you now. When we find that information, it helps us to understand the missing pieces, and then we can use the science of today to validate and confirm and fill in what that means in our lives and our bodies. You're going to see this in just a few minutes. But in addition to sharing time with those who preserve the records, it's been important for me to live and share time with the people who live the traditions, with the monks and the nuns and the abbots of the monasteries, with the shaman and curanderos and the healers of the Andes Mountains of Peru and Bolivia and Nepal and India. These are the people that live the traditions every day in their lives that are recorded in those texts. And it's by spending time with them. And I've been with these people when there are revolutions in the country, when their loved ones have been killed, when their children have been born. I've been with them when there's healing happening in the families, and we've shared meals together. And it's these very human experiences between us that allow a bond of friendship and trust and camaraderie. And in that trust is the confidence to ask the questions of the deepest mysteries. And because that trust is there, they're willing to share. So when I ask these people, when I ask the monks and the nuns, how do you create these miraculous healings in your body? I've been with monks and nuns over 120 years old. We can validate it in their papers, but they don't look 120. And I ask them, what do you do in your lives to give you your longevity? And it's because we have the trust. They are comfortable sharing with me, and they'll take me in the library and they'll say, in this passage it says to think and to feel in a certain way and to eat these things. And we do this. So I'm sharing all of this because this is part of the synthesis that I mentioned at the very beginning of this program.
I know.
We live in a world that's changing very quickly, and the science is good, but the science is incomplete in some places. Our ancestors had answers and understandings that we can melt. I was going to say marry. We can marry into the science. We can meld into the science. And I think this is the value of this kind of summit that we're doing here today. And I so appreciate the opportunity to participate and contribute to this summit, because we have an advantage that our ancestors never had. Our ancestors had wisdom, the indigenous earth-based wisdom of their time that helped them, and we have modern science of our time that helps us. Both, we know, are incomplete. When I was in the corporations as a scientist, as an engineer, I was told I had to make a choice. I had to choose a path of either science or spirituality. They actually told me that I could not serve two masters. It sounded almost religious. Greg, you cannot serve two masters. You cannot serve science and spiritual or ancient wisdom path. So you must choose. And I asked a question in return. I said, what if I don't make that choice? What if I don't choose science or spirituality? What if we don't, as a society? What if instead we marry these two great ways of knowing into a wisdom that is more than either can be individually? What if we marry the best science of the 21st century with 5,000 years of wisdom of our past into a wisdom that gives us something greater than either could do individually? Where does that lead us? And that is precisely what we're talking about here today. So that's why we wanted to take this little detour and just talk to you a little bit about why I feel it's important to marry so many different ways, to synthesize so many different ways of knowing and so many different experiences, to bring them to bear upon our lives in the healthiest way possible. So for 5,000 years, our ancestors answered the question, who are we? They did it in a way that made sense to them. Science, as I mentioned, is only 300 years old. Science is trying to answer big questions in life. In the last 150 years, since the time of Charles Darwin, science has told us a story. So when you were in school, when I was in school, if you were in school in the West, if you were in a public school in the West, you were steeped in the same story that I was steeped in and the story that our young people are being steeped in today. It's a story of separation, competition, and conflict. Modern science, when they ask the question, who are we? They attempt to answer this question by answering what are called the 6 perennial questions of life. I'm sharing them with you on this inverted pyramid. And the first question begins at the foundation, at the very bottom of the pyramid. The first question, what is the origin of life? I'm going to run through these 6 questions quickly. And then on the left side, I'm going to share with you what science has told us in the past. On the right side, I'm going to share with you what the best science of the 21st century is now telling us. And that will lead us into the discovery that helps us to heal our bodies in new and exciting ways and helps us to create that resilience in our lives that we've been talking about. So, who are we? The first question, what is the origin of life? Where does life come from? The second question,
car ride?
What is the origin of human life? And people say, well, isn't that the same as the first? Maybe. Maybe not. There are schools of thought that say that human life has come from someplace other than the origin of all other life. So that's why this is one of the perennial questions. Third question, what is our relationship to our body? Are we separate and powerless when it comes to healing our bodies, or are we somehow deeply connected? Do we have the ability to influence our bodies? And I'm using that word very consciously. I'm not talking about control or manipulation. I'm talking about the ability to influence the healing and the health and the quality of life in our bodies. The next question is, what is our relationship to the world beyond our bodies? And the same statements apply. Are we separate from our world? Are we connected? Do we have the ability to influence, not control or manipulate, but influence what happens in the world around us? The next question, what is our relationship to the past? Are we at the pinnacle of technological sophistication? It's something that's happened only once. We began primitive, and now we are at this place where we have iPads, iPods, the internet. Are we at this pinnacle of sophistication, or are we living in a cyclic experience of civilizations? What is our relationship to the past? And the last question, what is the fundamental rule of nature? What is the rule that nature is based upon? All right? These are the questions. The last 150 years, We have been taught that the origin of life is random. And this is the big controversy now, because the data simply is not supporting this. But this is what we have been taught. The physical data no longer supports this, that all life came from a single organism. The origin of human life, we've been taught that that is random. The DNA does not support that all life came from a single organism. What is our relationship to our bodies? We've been taught that we are separate from our bodies, that we are essentially powerless when it comes to healing our bodies or influencing the healing of our bodies. I remember the very first time I really got this. I was a competitive runner for years when I was living in Denver, Colorado, working as a geologist. And for the first time, I had an injury to my knee. And I remember I went to the doctor, and I was sitting up on the table. He was examining my knee. And just in passing, I believe that he thought the same way that I did. So I asked the doctor, I said, what is it that I can feel that might help my knee to heal a little bit better? How could I feel differently in my body that would affect the healing of my knee so I can run in a race in 10 days? And I remember the doctor looked up at me and he said, son, he said, you can feel whatever you want to feel. It's not going to make a damn bit of difference when it comes to healing your knee. And I immediately thought, ooh, the wrong doctor. But it was obvious that he had a very different way of thinking about us and our relationship to the body. And this is what we've been conditioned to believe. We're separate from our bodies. Our relationship to the world, we've been taught that we're separate from the world around us, that we must somehow defend ourselves from the elements of nature, the very elements that we are part of, that make up our bodies. Our relationship to the past. We've been taught that civilization is linear. It began primitive about 5,000 years ago, and now it has evolved into the sophistication that we see today, and it's a one-time deal, and that we are at the pinnacle of that sophistication. We have been taught the fundamental rule of nature is competition, that nature is based upon this model of competition and conflict. This is Darwin's idea again. So if you're taking notes and you're writing these down on this side of your paper, on this side of the screen, you call these false assumptions, because every one of these through peer-reviewed science is now acknowledged to be a false assumption, and then you can draw one of these right through it. Because these ideas are no longer true. They're still being taught in the classrooms, they're still being taught in the textbooks. These are the ideas of separation and conflict that emerged in the late 1800s, early 1900s. And people say, why is that important today? Here's the reason. It's a good question. Because our society is based upon these principles, and our medical and healing models are based upon these principles. The economy that is no longer working for much of the world is based on unsustainable principles that you see here of competition and conflict. Corporations are based on these unsustainable principles, and the model of healing from our bodies by not addressing the cause but trying to fix the symptom is unsustainable. That's why we see the epidemics that we're seeing today. The good news, new discoveries have overturned all of these ideas. We now know that the origin of life is not random. The physical evidence doesn't support it. It shows us that there's something much, much deeper happening here. In longer programs, we could go into it in more detail. The origin of human life is not random. The DNA is telling us this. The relationship to our body, we are deeply connected to our bodies. Thoughts, feelings, emotions, beliefs between our heart and our brain, as we'll see in a moment, trigger the chemistry that is released into the body, and that conversation between the heart and the brain is based on the way we feel, on our emotions. Whereas our relationship to the world, we are deeply connected, and we have the ability to influence, not control or manipulate, but influence the world around us. Our relationship to the past, we now know that civilization, advanced technological civilizations, are cyclic. They're not linear. And the date of the earliest civilizations now, scientific data now is confirming, it's over twice as old as what we've been led to believe. Back into the last ice age, about 13,000 years ago, and one of the sites that is a hallmark of this is the site that is called Göbekli Tepe. It is in Syria. It's in Turkey, near the Syrian border, a very difficult place right now. Göbekli Tepe. And the last item that plays such a powerful role in our communities and our families. The best science of the 21st century is now telling us the fundamental rule of nature. It's not based on competition and conflict. It's based on cooperation and mutual aid. Now, I know these are big claims. I've gone through these quickly, and I haven't backed these up in this brief presentation. I want you to know the bibliography of a 2010 release that is entitled Deep Truth, a Hay House book that I released in 2010. If you go to the bibliography, peer-reviewed science will share with you, or will describe for you, where all those statements come from. What I want you to see right now is that we are living a new world. We are moving from the false assumptions to the new discoveries. We are moving from a world of separation and thinking of ourselves as separate from our bodies and our world to a world of connection. We're moving from a world of competition and conflict that is no longer sustainable, is not helping us to solve the problems in our bodies or the world beyond our bodies, into a world of cooperation and mutual aid. The reason I'm saying this, if you find yourself in a place where the old ideas of what you and I were taught no longer work, and they can't solve the problems that you're facing in life, I'm going to invite you to let them go, come to the new discoveries, the discoveries of cooperation and mutual aid, and I think you'll be surprised at how well these ideas are adapted in everything from the economy to medicine to natural healing and the healing of our bodies, and that's what I want to talk about now. Because the story of our life is changing. All things are connected now. We know all things are important now. We were told that we live in a world where atoms are things rotating around other things. Now we know that's not true. This is image of a quantum atom. It's not things, it's fields of energy. Fields of energy that are pulsing and vibrating in very specific ways. We were taught that when we look in the heavens under the night sky, that the stars and the galaxies are all separate from one another. And that's what we're conditioned to thinking. This is an image through the Hubble Space Telescope, looking at the center of the universe, where those two arrows are. And it's easy to think why everything might be separate. But look at this, the same image through another telescope, through the Chandra space probe, is not looking optically, it's sensing fields and patterns of energy, and all of a sudden, we see everything is connected. Everything is connected, and this is what we now know. It's all energy. Einstein told us this early in the 20th century. We are that energy. The image you're seeing on the screen is actually from a study showing the light being emitted by photons from the human body, the light from the human body. We are energy, and that idea is just now awakening in the mainstream practice of the way we address life and healing in our bodies and longevity and health in our families. It's just now emerging. Everything is energy. Everything is connected. And that very idea is leading to what I believe, and I'm so excited about this, is probably one of the most profound discoveries of the 20th century and now the 21st century. The discovery made in 1991. It was the discovery of specialized cells in the human body, specifically in the heart, called sensory neurites. Sensory neurites. In 1991, there was discovery of about 40,000 of these specialized cells, sensory neurites, located in the heart. Now, sensory neurite, it's a neural-like tissue, but it's not in the brain. It has many of the functions that we find of neurons in the brain. It's located in the heart, and it's actually being called now the little brain in the heart. So just very clearly what I'm talking about here is two separate organs, the heart and the brain, separate organs. Each of them have a neural network that can function independently, but the key to many of the things that I'm talking about here, to the ancient wisdom, longevity, to anti-aging hormones, to powerful states of immunity, is when we connect these two neural networks together. When we connect the neural network of the heart and the brain together. The heart has its own brain. It's actually being called the little brain in the heart. And that has led to what is now being called heart intelligence. The reason it's being called heart intelligence is because these cells in the heart, they actually work independently. They can, of the cells in the brain. They can learn, they can remember, they can feel, they can sense. They have their own way of thinking and remembering. It's different from the brain, from the cranial brain. So just to be very clear, this network of neurons in the heart, it is separate from the brain, and it can work independently of the brain, and it can also be taught to be connected to the brain for one larger, potent neural network. And that's what we're going to talk about here. This was discovered 1991. It was actually published in the journal Neurocardiology, 1994, if you'd like to read the articles. And I love the name of the man who made the discovery of the little brain in the heart. His name is Armour, which essentially means love in many different languages. So I think it's probably no accident that his destiny has led him to the place that it has led him. So once this discovery was made of these cells in the heart, scientists also found that there are similar networks in other organs of the body. However, they do not exist in the same concentration as they do in the heart. So what I'm saying is there's a little brain in the heart, and there's also even a smaller brain in other organs of the body, in the gut, for example, in individual organs, kidneys, liver, lungs. So we suddenly find that our body is connected through a network of intelligence, and it is regulated by what is happening in the heart. And that is where our feelings and emotions come in. The way that we feel, the way that we emote, is the language that this network understands. Suddenly, the ancient wisdom becomes very, very important because the science is telling us that the network exists. But the scientists are saying, okay, what do we do with this? I'm paraphrasing a little bit here. That's where our ancestors, they didn't necessarily know how the network existed, but they said, we know it's there, and here's how you apply it in your lives. Science has had 300 years to establish the networks and the connections that help us to understand this. Our ancestors give us 5,000 years of applying these things in our lives. I wanted you to see what a sensory neurite looks like. This on the screen is under a slide. It's stained on a slide. This is one neuron, one of these sensory neurites. And you can see very clearly the little dendrites that are moving away from the single cell when many of them are connected. This is what the neurons look like when they're connected. And it's through these connections. This is what we call learning. When these neurons come together, we are learning or we are remembering, creating and anchoring a memory. And when they come apart, that is when we are forgetting. So this has implications in terms of things like dementia and Alzheimer's. It also has implications in terms of consciously severing these connections so that we may have less connection to the things that have hurt us, hurtful memories in the past. When those connections are broken, it's called pruning. So we're talking about a pruning of these neural connections. The key here is the heart brain and the cranial brain. These two brains, they're separate networks, but they work together. They communicate with the body, and the evidence suggests they even communicate beyond the body. So this is the beginning, I think, of a brand new science, a new science. How do we access the intelligence of the heart? I know I'm covering a lot of ground here. I'm moving quickly and just barely scratching the surface of what's possible here. But I want to talk to you a little bit about this heart intelligence. Now that we know this neural network exists between the heart and the brain, when we learn to connect them, it gives us all kinds of abilities. The heart intelligence, it's very, very fast. The heart thinks differently than the brain. Maybe you can intuit why that would be, because the heart does not go through the filters that the brain goes through to come to a decision or to make a choice or to access information. The heart does not go through the filters of ego, of self-value, of self-worth, of hurt, of anger, of frustration. The heart doesn't do that. So heart intelligence, it's very, very fast. Boom! The information is right there. When you ask your heart something in this connection, the answer is right there. The heart-brain connection, it is a hotline to the subconscious. And this is important because so many of the patterns that hurt us, so many of the patterns of disease in the human body, people would never consciously create those things, of course, but there are subconscious programming within all of us. From the time we are born until we're 7 years old, we are in a hypnagogic trance. We are sponges for patterns of information. We have no filters. So if we are in an environment that gives us good patterns, that's good. If we're in an environment with parents or in a society in wartime, for example, in the middle of a war zone, or with people who haven't learned the tools of emotional self-regulation, then we can pick up those patterns and they can lead to disease later in life. More on that in just a moment. So this connection is a conduit to the subconscious, is a conduit to very deep states of intuition, intentional intuition, We've all had moments where the intuition has come to us spontaneously, and we say, oh, I suddenly have a vision and I understand everything in the universe. Oh, it's gone. How does that happen? It's this connection where we can trigger these consciously at will and maintain the connections, creating what we now call super learning, moving into gamma states of brain activity, very high states of brain activity, and even states of precognition. The studies are showing where the heart anticipates an event that is going to be emotionally significant before the event ever happens. This is very well documented in scientific literature. There's a lot of controversy about how and why it happens, but there's no controversy of the fact that it is happening under laboratory conditions and in life. And if you're not into any of those things, just making this connection, it's a trigger for over 1,300 biochemical reactions in the body. And these include things like anti-aging hormones, the immune response, mood regulation, cardiovascular health, all of those things. Heart intelligence is very, very fast. And I just wanted to give you a quick example, the power of 180 seconds. Because the studies have shown that we know within 180 seconds, that's about 3 minutes. It is exactly 3 minutes, 60 seconds times 3. We know within 3 minutes when the person in our presence is a potential compatible life mate. Sustainable, compatible life mate forever. We know that within 180 seconds. Our heart knows it. However, we will often discount what our heart tells us, and we will enter into a personal relationship, a romantic relationship, a business relationship, a job, a friendship, even when our heart says this may not be the best thing, because we discount that experience and we tend to think with our mind, and we make all kinds of excuses and exceptions about why we think this may be successful. But the heart knows in 180 seconds. So in 180 seconds, we know if we've got the right partner. Sometimes we take 10 or 20 years for their life experience to catch up with us and say, oh, maybe that wasn't the best decision. Or maybe it was. So heart intelligence, very, very fast. Deep states of intuition. I wanted you to see what this looks like. What you're seeing on the screen is a scan of brain waves. And you're seeing in the center of the screen a big dip in the brain waves because something has grabbed the brain's attention. Because this was under laboratory conditions, we now know what it was. It was a heartbeat. It was the R wave, the peak wave of a heartbeat, grabbing the attention of the brain waves. This is showing us a beautiful example of when we are in that optimum connection. This is the heart communicating with the brain. Those brain waves are what you're seeing on the left side of the screen. This is the heart-brain connection. And when you have that, that is you connecting to your subconscious, you connecting to making powerful affirmations that your body understands, you having deep states of intuition. So all of these things are possible. This is why this connection is so powerful. It's why I'm so excited to share this with you and talk to you about it. But it goes beyond our physical body. What you're seeing on the screen is a brainwave of a mother who has given birth to a baby. The baby is in another room in the same building. You're seeing, again, a big dip in the mother's brainwave. And the scientists are saying, what is the brain responding to? Well, because it's under laboratory conditions, they can tell that the mother's brain is responding to the baby's heartbeat in another part of the house. So even though they are not physically connected, the last graph was for one individual, heart-brain connection for an individual. This is the baby's heartbeat showing up in the mother's brain waves. This is how a mother knows when her child needs something. This is the deep connection that a mother will have with her children all of her life, whether they're in the same house or in the same room or they're in a battlefield halfway around the world. Parents know when their kids are in trouble and when good things are happening as well. It's not all about bad things. And this helps us to understand why this is. It's amazing, absolutely amazing to see what this means. So this heart intelligence, fast conduit to subconscious, deep intuition, the trigger for these biochemical reactions in our bodies, and it goes even further than that. Now, I mentioned earlier in the program, our world is changing, and that change can be stressful. We don't know how to deal with that change. One of the ways of dealing with the change is consciously linking the heart and the brain. We're going to talk about that briefly in just a moment. But it is that stress that is unresolved that actually is now being viewed as responsible for old age and even death. This is from the Proceedings of National Academy of Sciences 2004, is that the end of the DNA, the telomeres at the end of the DNA, as they shorten, we call it senescence, And as they shorten enough, then they can no longer reproduce in a healthy way. We call that death. What they're finding is unresolved stress. Chronic stress is actually shortening the telomeres at the end of the DNA as they go through the cell division. So this is science telling us that stress is killing. And it doesn't have to, because we now have the technology to know what to deal with this. The longer those telomeres are at the end of the DNA, the longer we live life and the healthier we can be. All right, so how do we optimize this heart-brain connection? I mentioned the Institute of Heart Math just a moment ago. They've done some amazing studies, and among those studies is exploring the conversation between the heart and the brain. Every moment of every day, the heart is sending information to the brain, and the brain is responding and sending information back to the heart. The big conversations between the heart and the brain, the lesser conversations